The Arizona desert stretched before him like a vast ocean of sand and stone, indifferent to the drama of human suffering playing out across its scorched terrain. Blood dripped from Nathan Reed's shoulder, each crimson drop disappearing instantly into the thirsty earth. The thundering hoofbeats behind him had faded, but he knew better than to slow his pace. Those men wouldn't stop until they found him, dead or alive. His horse, a sturdy chestnut mare he'd named Penny, labored beneath him. Her coat glistened with sweat, her breathing ragged as she navigated the treacherous landscape. Nathan patted her neck with his good hand, the other clutching his wounded shoulder. "Just a little farther, girl," he whispered, his voice rough from thirst. "We'll find that canyon and lose them for good." The sun hung mercilessly overhead, a white-hot eye that missed nothing. Nathan squinted against its glare, scanning the horizon for the narrow passage marked on his crude map. It was there, a sliver of shadow between towering red cliffs. He urged Penny forward, feeling her gather her remaining strength. Behind them, dust clouds rose in the distance. 3 riders had appeared on the ridge they'd crossed not 20 minutes earlier. Nathan cursed under his breath. They were persistent, he'd give them that. But he hadn't survived the war and 5 years on the run by being easy to catch. The canyon entrance loomed ahead, barely wide enough for a horse and rider. Nathan guided Penny toward it, feeling a surge of hope. If they could make it through, the pursuers would have to follow single file, easy targets if it came to a shootout. Not that he had many bullets to spare. As they slipped into the blessed shade of the canyon, Nathan allowed himself to breathe. The temperature dropped immediately, the high walls blocking the punishing sun. Penny's hooves clacked against stone as they wound deeper into the narrow passage. The sounds echoed, creating the impression of multiple riders, a small advantage if his pursuers were listening. They emerged on the other side into a broader valley flanked by weathered mesas. Nathan paused, listening. No sounds of pursuit yet. He reached for his canteen, took a small, careful sip, then offered some to Penny. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it was all they had. His saddlebag shifted, drawing his attention to the precious cargo it contained. With his good arm, he reached back to ensure it was secure, a leather pouch containing an old map and a partially burned family photograph. All he had left of his former life. "Come on," he urged Penny. "We need distance." They rode until the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Nathan's vision blurred occasionally, his body weakening from blood loss and exhaustion. He knew he couldn't go much farther, but stopping meant death, either from his pursuers or from the desert itself. By nightfall, Penny could barely walk. Her proud head hung low, her steps faltering. Nathan dismounted, nearly collapsing as his boots hit the ground. He leaned against her flank, feeling her trembling muscles. "I'm sorry, old girl," he murmured, stroking her neck. "I've asked too much." He looked around desperately. The landscape offered no shelter, no water, just endless red earth and scattered scrub. In the moonlight, the desert took on an otherworldly quality, beautiful and deadly. Nathan untied his bedroll with clumsy fingers, laid it on the ground, and collapsed onto it. The stars wheeled overhead, countless and indifferent. Nathan's thoughts drifted, his consciousness slipping as fever took hold. The desert night grew cold, but he burned from within. His mind wandered through memories like a man lost in a house of mirrors, each reflection more distorted than the last. He was back in uniform, the weight of his rifle familiar in his hands. The dawn light filtered through the cottonwoods as his unit approached the sleeping Apache village. Captain Thompson's orders had been clear: secure the area, nothing more. But Nathan had served under Thompson long enough to recognize the cold gleam in his eyes, the tension in his jaw that signaled something worse to come. The village woke to gunfire and screams. Women clutching children ran from their wickiups, only to be cut down. Nathan froze, watching in horror as his fellow soldiers transformed into monsters. When he finally moved, it was to grab Thompson's arm as the captain raised his pistol toward a fleeing mother and child. "Sir, these aren't combatants," he shouted over the chaos. Thompson's face contorted with rage. "Stand down, Sergeant." When Nathan didn't release his grip, Thompson swung the butt of his pistol, connecting with Nathan's temple. The world went black. When he came to, the village was silent except for the crackling of flames. Bodies lay scattered like broken dolls. Nathan stumbled to his feet, his head throbbing. He found Thompson standing over a fallen Apache woman, adjusting his belt, a satisfied smirk on his face. Nearby, a small child cowered behind a water barrel. Nathan didn't remember drawing his sidearm. He didn't remember pulling the trigger. But he would never forget the look of surprise on Thompson's face as the bullet found his heart, or the way his body crumpled to the earth. After that, everything became a blur of motion. Nathan grabbed the child, a little girl with weenus terrified eyes, and ran for the tree line where a few survivors were gathered. He handed her to an older woman, pressed his canteen into her hands, and gestured toward the hills. Then he returned to the village, helping as many as he could escape before his fellow soldiers realized what was happening. By the time they did, Nathan was already gone, a deserter with a price on his head and blood on his hands. The memory dissolved as Nathan's fever spiked. He fumbled weakly for his canteen, finding it nearly empty. One small sip was all he allowed himself. In his delirium, he reached into his shirt pocket, fingers closing around a small, hard object, a piece of iridescent shell inlay from a ceremonial Apache knife that had broken during the massacre. He'd kept it all these years, though he couldn't have explained why. Perhaps as evidence of his sins, perhaps as a talisman. Penny whinnied softly, nosing his face. Nathan tried to rise to check on her, but his body refused to obey. The world tilted and spun. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was his horse standing sentinel beside him, her outline stark against the star-filled sky. He dreamed of fire and water, of blood on his hands that would not wash clean. He dreamed of the faces of those he'd failed to save, their eyes accusing, and beneath it all, the sound of a woman singing in a language he didn't understand, a melody both mournful and strangely comforting. When consciousness returned, it was fractured and fleeting. The sun beat down again, turning his skin to fire. Penny was gone. Nathan couldn't find the strength to call for her. His throat was cracked leather, his tongue swollen. The wound in his shoulder pulsed with each heartbeat, hot and angry. He was going to die here, he realized. It was fitting, perhaps. A kind of justice. He closed his eyes against the blinding light, surrendering to what seemed inevitable. Then came the sound of footsteps, light and careful, approaching from the rocks. Nathan couldn't open his eyes, couldn't move, but he heard voices, musical and quick, speaking in words he didn't recognize. Then cutting through his fog, a single clear sentence in English. "Don't move." Nathan's lips cracked as they formed a smile. There was no danger of that. A cool shadow fell across his face, blessed relief from the sun's glare. Gentle fingers touched his jaw, turning his face. Then, miracle of miracles, water on his parched lips. Just a trickle, but it tasted like life itself. "Easy," the same voice said. "Too fast, you die." Another voice spoke, low and scolding, in what Nathan now recognized as Apache. Then a third voice, younger than the others, replied in the same language. Nathan forced his eyes open, blinking against the light. 3 faces came into view, hovering above him like visions from another world. 3 Apache women dressed in travel clothes, each studying him with a different expression. The oldest had lines at the corners of her eyes that spoke of hardship and rare laughter. The second had a gentleness in her gaze that contrasted with the empty sleeve where her left arm should have been. The youngest had a wildness about her, her dark eyes sharp with suspicion. With tremendous effort, Nathan shaped his cracked lips into words. The Apache words came slowly, painfully, but he forced them out. "Shiash, dao shike, nitsa." "I am sorry." The youngest woman's eyes widened, her hand dropping to a small pouch at her waist, a child's beaded medicine bag, worn with age but carefully preserved. For a moment, her fierce expression wavered, revealing something vulnerable beneath her guardedness. "He speaks our tongue," she whispered to the others, fingers tracing the edge of the pouch almost unconsciously. The 3 women exchanged startled glances. The youngest one spoke rapidly, her hand moving to the knife at her waist. The oldest responded, her tone measured but firm. The one with one arm placed a restraining hand on the youngest's wrist, then offered Nathan another careful sip of water. The oldest woman leaned closer, her English accented but clear. "I am Ahote. This is Dolly." She nodded toward the one-armed woman. "And Meili." The young one still watched him warily. What is your name, white man who speaks Apache? Nathan, he managed. Nathan Reed. Melly suddenly spoke directly to him in English, her voice surprisingly melodious. Why does a white man apologize in our tongue? Nathan closed his eyes briefly, gathering what little strength he had. I was there when your people were killed. I couldn't stop it. Not in time. A tense silence followed. Nathan felt the weight of their gazes, judging, evaluating. He waited for anger, for the knife he'd seen at Mealy's waist to find his heart. It would be justice, after all. Instead, Melly reached into her clothing and withdrew a small leather pouch, carefully opening it to reveal a child's moccasin, sized for a very young girl. This belonged to my sister, Kayla. She was the child you helped escape that day. Her voice hardened slightly. She survived the attack but died during the winter that followed, before we found this valley. Nathan stared at the tiny moccasin, memories flooding back. The little girl behind the water barrel. I remember her eyes. His voice caught. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. You gave her 4 more seasons of life, Melly said, her tone softening. 4 seasons of seeing the sky and feeling the rain. Our grandmother always said Kala had the gift of finding beauty even in the darkest places. She carefully returned the moccasin to its pouch. That is why I recognized you in my dreams. Not just your face, but your spirit. The man who chose to protect when others chose to destroy. Instead, Melly turned to the others and spoke rapidly in Apache. Nathan caught fragments. The dream, grandmother. Fire night, Ahote replied sharply, but Melly continued, gesturing emphatically. Finally, Ahote sighed and addressed Nathan again. Can you sit? With their help, he managed to prop himself against a rock. The world spun briefly, then steadied. Dolly examined his shoulder wound with gentle, practiced touches. She said something to Ahote, who nodded. You need medicine, Ahote told him, and shelter. The sun will kill you before your wound does. Nathan shook his head weakly. Why, help me? Melly knelt beside him, her dark eyes searching his face. You are the man from my dream, she said simply. The one who saved our grandmother on the night of fire. Nathan stared at her in confusion. I don't. 5 summers ago, Ahote explained, her voice taut with old pain. Soldiers came to our village near the river. They killed many, but some escaped, including our grandmother who told of a soldier who turned against his own people to help ours. Understanding dawned slowly in Nathan's fever-addled mind. The old woman, with the little girl? Melly nodded, a flash of something, recognition, perhaps, crossing her face. Our grandmother raised us after our parents were killed. She died 2 winters ago, but before she left, she had visions. She said a man with a divided soul would find his way to our valley. Nathan struggled to process this. Coincidence seemed too small a word. Destiny too grand. Whatever it was, these women from the very village he'd failed to protect were now offering him salvation he didn't deserve. My horse, he said suddenly, remembering Penny. Your mare is drinking at our spring. Dolly spoke for the first time in English, her voice soft but clear. She found us before we found you. Animals know where water hides in the desert. They fashioned a travois from branches and blankets, securing Nathan to it. Penny, refreshed from water and rest, would pull him. Before they set off, Ahote knelt beside him one last time. The men who hunt you, they will not find our valley. But if they do, her hand moved to the rifle slung across her back, making her meaning clear. The journey passed in a haze of pain and fleeting consciousness for Nathan. Sometimes he was aware of the gentle swaying of the travois, the sound of the women's voices as they traveled. Other times he drifted into fevered dreams where past and present blurred. Once he awoke to find Dolly walking beside him, singing softly, the same melody he'd heard in his dreams. Their eyes met, and she continued without breaking the song, her good hand occasionally checking his forehead for fever. They traveled through the heat of the day and into the cool of evening. As night fell, the terrain changed. The barren desert gave way to scrubland, then to a narrow pass between towering rock formations. Nathan glimpsed stars above, framed by the high walls of the passage. When he next opened his eyes, they were descending into a hidden valley cradled between protective cliffs. In the moonlight, Nathan could make out the shimmer of water, a small stream winding through the center of the valley. Near its banks stood several structures, a main wickiup and two smaller ones, their shapes familiar from his nightmare memories. But this was no nightmare. This was a sanctuary, hidden from the world that wanted him dead. Ahote and Melly helped him from the travois, while Dolly prepared a pallet inside the largest wickiup. The interior was cool and smelled of sage and cedar. They lowered him gently onto the soft bedding of hides and woven blankets. Dolly brought a wooden cup of bitter-smelling liquid. "Drink," she instructed. "It will fight the fever." Nathan complied, grimacing at the taste. Melly hovered nearby, watching him with those intent eyes. Ahote busied herself with Penny, removing the travois and speaking to the horse in soft Apache words. Despite his exhaustion, Nathan fought to stay conscious. "Why did you bring me here?" he asked. Melly sat cross-legged beside him. "I told you, grandmother saw you in her vision. But I'm a danger to you. Those men tracking me will die if they find this place," Ahote finished, entering the wickiup. She set his saddlebag near his pallet. "Now rest. Questions can wait until the fever breaks." As if given permission, Nathan felt himself sinking into darkness. The last thing he saw was Dolly preparing poultices for his wound, her movements graceful despite her missing arm. The last thing he heard was Melly's voice, speaking to the others. "He is the one, the man between worlds." Grandmother was never wrong. Days passed in a blur of fever and pain. Nathan drifted between consciousness and delirium, sometimes aware of gentle hands changing the dressing on his wound or raising a cup of water to his lips, other times lost in the labyrinth of his memories. He dreamed of the burned photograph in his saddlebag, his parents standing proudly outside their small Minnesota farmhouse, their faces already starting to fade from his memory. He dreamed of Captain Thompson's dying curse and of the little Apache girl he'd helped escape. He dreamed of the years on the run, always looking over his shoulder, never staying in one place long enough to be anything but a ghost. When the fever finally broke, it was dawn. Nathan awoke to find the wickiup empty except for Dolly, who sat nearby grinding herbs with a stone pestle. She sensed his wakeful state immediately, setting aside her work to check his forehead. "The fever spirit has left you," she said with quiet satisfaction. "You will live," Nathan read. He tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. Dolly helped him, arranging hides behind his back for support. She offered him a cup of cool water, which he accepted gratefully. "How long?" he asked, his voice rusty from disuse. "4 days since we found you," she replied. "The wound was angry, but the medicine is stronger." She indicated his bandaged shoulder with a nod. "It will heal now if you are patient." Nathan took in his surroundings properly for the first time. The wickiup was larger than it had appeared from outside. The interior space organized with the careful efficiency of people who owned little but valued what they had. Bundles of herbs hung from the ceiling poles. Baskets of various sizes lined one wall, some containing dried foods, others tools or clothing. A small fire pit occupied the center, currently cold but ready for evening. "Where are the others?" he asked. "Ahote hunts. Melee gathers water." Dolly resumed her work with the pestle. "They will return soon." Nathan watched her work, noting the deft ways she managed with one arm. As if sensing his thoughts, she glanced up. "You wonder about my arm." It wasn't a question, but Nathan nodded anyway. "The soldiers took it," she said simply, "the same day they took our parents. I was fortunate. Many lost more." There was no self-pity in her voice, only a statement of fact. Nathan's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." "You have said this many times in your fever," Dolly replied, "but you were not the one who took my arm. You were the one who helped our grandmother escape with Melly." "It wasn't enough," Nathan said, the old guilt rising. "I should have stopped them sooner. I should have known what Thompson planned." Dolly set down her pestle and faced him fully. "The past is like the wind. You cannot hold it or change its direction. You can only decide how to stand when it blows through you." Before Nathan could respond, the wickiup flap opened, and Ahote entered, a brace of rabbits in her hand. She paused, seeing Nathan sitting up. "So you rejoined the living," she said, her tone neutral. She set the rabbits aside and approached, studying him with those knowing eyes. "How is the shoulder?" "Better," Nathan said, "thanks to your care." Ahote nodded once, then reached for his saddlebag. Nathan tensed as she opened it, extracting the map and burned photograph. You carried these across the desert, she said, examining the items. They must be important. Nathan swallowed hard. The photo is all I have left of my family. The map, he hesitated, shows the way to treasure, Ahote finished for him, unfolding the worn paper. Gold, I assume. Isn't that what white men always seek in our lands? It's not what you think, Nathan began, but Mellie's entrance interrupted him. She carried two water skins, her small frame belying her strength. When she saw Nathan awake, she set them down quickly and moved to his side, her eyes bright with excitement. The fever has broken, she said, looking to Dolly for confirmation. When Dolly nodded, Mellie's face broke into a rare smile. Good. There is much to show you when you are stronger. Nathan was struck by the contrast between Mellie's enthusiasm and Ahote's reserve. Why did you believe your grandmother's vision about me? He asked Mellie directly. Her smile faded, replaced by a solemn expression beyond her years. Because I have the dreams too. I saw you in the desert before we found you. I saw your horse standing guard. I saw the shell piece you carry. Her gaze dropped to his shirt pocket, where the iridescent fragment still rested. Nathan's hand moved reflexively to cover the pocket. How could you know about that? Mellie's eyes met his, unflinching. The same way I know you killed your captain to save our people. The same way I know those men who hunt you want more than justice. They want what you carry. She nodded toward the map in Ahote's hands. Ahote refolded the map carefully. You will tell us everything when you have eaten, she said, making it clear this was not a request. For now, rest. Your body is still healing. As she moved away to prepare the rabbits, Nathan found himself at a crossroads. These women had saved his life, but they had also brought him into their hidden world, a world that would be endangered by his presence. The honorable thing would be to leave as soon as he was able, to draw the danger away from them. Yet even as he thought this, he knew it wasn't so simple. There was something here, some purpose in this unlikely meeting that transcended coincidence. Mellie's dreams, the grandmother's vision, his own journey carrying him to the very people he tried to save years ago. It formed a pattern he couldn't dismiss. That night, they gathered around the small fire inside the wickiup. The rabbit stew filled the space with rich aroma, reminding Nathan how long it had been since he'd eaten a proper meal. They ate in silence at first, the only sounds the soft scrape of wooden spoons against clay bowls. Finally, Ahote set aside her empty bowl and fixed Nathan with her steady gaze. Now, she said, you will tell us your story. All of it. Nathan looked at each of them in turn, Ahote with her watchful eyes, Dolly with her quiet strength, Mellie with her uncanny perception. They had saved him, fed him, tended his wounds. They deserved the truth. So he told them everything. About his upbringing in Minnesota, the son of farmers who taught him to shoot straight and speak honestly. About joining the army after his parents died in an influenza outbreak, seeking structure in a world suddenly empty. About being assigned to Captain James Thompson's unit, patrolling the territories where tensions between settlers and native tribes simmered constantly. He told them about the orders that came that spring morning 5 years ago, supposedly to investigate reports of raids on white settlements. How Thompson had led them not to suspected warrior camps, but to a peaceful village where women and children were just waking. His voice grew hoarse as he described the massacre, his failed attempt to stop it, and his final confrontation with Thompson. The women listened without interruption, their faces illuminated by the dancing flames. After I killed him, I helped as many of your people escape as I could, Nathan continued. But it wasn't enough. It could never be enough. And the map? Ahote prompted, her expression unreadable. Nathan sighed. I found it among Thompson's things afterward. He'd been obsessed with stories of an Apache treasure, what he called the Tears of the Sun. Gold, hidden somewhere in these mountains. I think that's why he attacked your village. He thought someone there knew where to find it. And you kept this map all these years, Ahote observed. Wait, do you also seek this gold? Nathan shook his head. I kept it because I thought it might explain why he did what he did, why so many had to die, and he hesitated. I thought perhaps someday I could find the right people to give it to, the people it rightfully belongs to. A silence fell over the wickiup, broken only by the soft crackling of the fire. Outside, the desert night had settled, bringing with it a profound stillness. Finally, Melly spoke. "And the men who hunt you now?" "Ezra Thompson, the captain's brother." Nathan's mouth twisted bitterly. "He spent years tracking me down, partly for the bounty on my head, partly to avenge his brother, but mostly, I think, for this map. The Thompson family has powerful mining interests. Gold like this could make them kings in the territory." Ahote and Dolly exchanged a look laden with meaning. Melly's eyes never left Nathan's face. "Our people have stories," Dolly said carefully, "of the sun's tears falling to earth long ago. Not gold as white men understand it, but something more precious." She glanced at Ahote, who nodded slightly, giving permission to continue. "Water, a hidden spring that never runs dry, even in the worst drought, and caves where the healing plants grow, even in winter." Nathan frowned. Thompson was convinced it was gold. "Men see what they wish to see," Ahote said flatly. "Your captain heard our stories and translated them into his own greed." Melly leaned forward suddenly. "Show him," she urged Ahote. "He should know." After a moment's consideration, Ahote rose and went to one of the baskets against the wall. She returned with a small object wrapped in soft hide. Carefully she unwrapped it, revealing a fragment of what appeared to be a ceremonial knife handle, intricately carved from bone or antler. The piece was broken, its edge jagged where it had once connected to the blade. "This belonged to our great-grandfather," Ahote explained. "It was broken the day our tribes divided, long before any of us were born. Half remained with our family, half went with those who followed Nakoe to the north." Nathan's pulse quickened. Slowly he reached into his shirt pocket and withdrew the iridescent shell fragment. In the firelight, its color shifted, blue to green to purple, as he placed it beside the knife handle. It was clearly a piece of inlay that had once been set into the handle, the shapes matching perfectly. "Where did you find this?" Ahote asked sharply. "In the ashes of your village," Nathan answered. "I didn't know what it was, only that it seemed important somehow." Melly's eyes shone in the firelight. "You see, grandmother knew. The man between worlds would bring back what was lost." Ahote remained skeptical. "One piece of shell does not make him our savior, Melly." "No," Dolly agreed quietly, "but perhaps it makes him part of a pattern we do not yet understand." Nathan looked from one woman to another, feeling the weight of expectations he couldn't possibly fulfill. "I'm no savior," he said firmly. "I'm a wanted man with a price on his head. Once I'm strong enough, I should go. For your safety." "And where will you go?" Ahote challenged. "Back to the desert? To die under the sun? Or at the hands of Thompson's brother?" Before Nathan could answer, Melly touched his arm lightly. "Tomorrow," she said, "I will show you something. Then you can decide." That night, as the others slept, Nathan lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the hidden valley. The soft whisper of the stream outside, the occasional call of a night bird, the gentle breathing of the three women who had, against all odds, become his rescuers. His shoulder still ached, but the fevered confusion had cleared from his mind. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to consider a future beyond mere survival, beyond the next town, the next false name, the next hasty departure in the night. Could there be a place for him here, in this hidden valley with these remarkable women? Or was he merely passing through, another ghost in their lives, destined to bring them nothing but the danger that followed him like a shadow? As moonlight filtered through the smoke hole above, casting silver patterns across the earthen floor, Nathan felt something unfamiliar stirring within him. Not hope. He'd abandoned that luxury long ago. But perhaps its quieter cousin, possibility. With that fragile thought cradled in his mind, he finally drifted into the first peaceful sleep he'd known in years. Morning arrived with golden light filtering through the smoke hole of the wickiup, casting a perfect circle on the earthen floor. Nathan woke to the sounds of quiet activity, Ahote stoking the small fire, Dolly grinding cornmeal between stones, their movements harmonized by years of shared living. Melly was nowhere to be seen. Nathan sat up carefully, testing his wounded shoulder. The pain had receded to a dull throb, and the feverish heat was gone. He felt weak but clear-headed, like a man emerging from a long tunnel into unexpected daylight. "You slept well," Dolly observed without looking up from her work. It wasn't a question. Better than I have in years, Nathan admitted. He accepted a cup of water from Ahote with a nod of thanks. Where's Melly? Checking the perimeter, Ahote replied. We may be hidden, but we are not careless. After a simple breakfast of corn cakes and dried berries, Dolly examined Nathan's wound, applying a fresh poultice of herbs that smelled of earth and pine. You heal quickly, she noted, rewrapping his shoulder. In a few days, you will have your strength back. Thanks to your medicine, Nathan said. He watched her work, marveling at her dexterity with one arm. You've adapted well, he observed quietly. Dolly's hands paused briefly. When the soldiers took my arm, I believed they took my purpose too. I was to be a weaver of baskets and blankets. The finest in our tribe, my mother said. Her voice held no self-pity, only a calm acceptance. For a season, I let myself become empty. Then our grandmother showed me the healing plants. Your hands were meant for mending, she told me. One hand can still heal. The simplicity and depth of her words struck Nathan speechless. He had carried his guilt like a stone for 5 years, letting it define him. This woman had lost far more yet had found a way to create meaning from her loss. The wickiup flap opened and Melly entered, bringing with her the scent of sage and desert air. Her eyes were bright with anticipation. The path is clear, she announced. No tracks but our own for miles. She turned to Nathan. Can you walk today? There is something you must see. Nathan nodded, rising slowly. His legs felt unsteady after days of illness, but they supported him. Ahote handed him his boots, cleaned of desert dust. Do not tire him, Melly, she warned. His strength is still returning. Melly made a dismissive gesture. The walk is not far, and he is stronger than he looks. Outside, the hidden valley revealed itself fully in daylight. Nestled between protective cliffs, it stretched perhaps half a mile in length, its heart a silver thread of stream winding through surprisingly green vegetation. The 3 wickiups stood near the water, with small garden plots nearby. On the far side of the stream, Nathan could make out what appeared to be a natural cave entrance in the rock face. The air was cooler here than in the open desert, the high cliffs providing shade during the hottest parts of the day. Overhead, an eagle circled lazily against the blue sky, so high it appeared no larger than a sparrow. This place, Nathan began, struggling to find words for its unexpected beauty, is hidden from those who do not need it, Melly finished for him. She led him along a narrow path that followed the stream. Our people have known of this valley for generations, but only a few, those who needed to disappear from the world outside, have ever lived here. Like you 3, Melly nodded. After the soldiers came, after our grandmother led us and a few others to safety, we wandered for many moons. Some of our people joined other bands. Some tried to reach the reservation. But our grandmother remembered this place from stories of her youth. She brought us here to heal and to wait. Wait for what? Nathan asked. Melly gave him a sidelong glance. For you, Nathan Reed. They walked in silence after that, Nathan absorbing the implications of her words. The path gradually ascended, moving away from the stream toward the eastern cliff wall. Melly moved with the quiet grace of one born to this landscape, occasionally pausing to let Nathan rest. Eventually they reached what appeared to be a dead end, a sheer rock face covered partially by scrub brush. Melly pushed aside the brush to reveal a narrow opening, barely wide enough for a person to slip through sideways. Watch your head, she advised, disappearing into the crevice. Nathan hesitated, then followed, squeezing through the tight passage. The rock walls pressed close on either side, cool against his arms. After a few yards, the passage widened abruptly into a small chamber, illuminated by light filtering through cracks in the ceiling. The chamber's walls were covered in paintings, ancient handprints in red ochre, stick figures of hunters pursuing antelope, zigzag patterns representing water, or perhaps mountains. But what drew Nathan's eye was a more recent addition, a figure painted in white clay, standing between 2 worlds depicted as spiraling circles. One spiral was painted in red, the other in blue. The figure had 1 foot in each. The man between worlds, Melly said softly, watching his face. Our grandmother added this after her vision, before her passing. Nathan stared at the crude but powerful image. She couldn't have known I would come here. Couldn't she? Melly touched the painting gently. She saw many things that hadn't yet happened. She saw Dolly becoming a healer. She saw Ahote leading when no one would follow. She saw me. Melly's voice faltered slightly. She saw me walking in dreams, like she did. Nathan turned to face her. And what do you see in your dreams, Melly? Her dark eyes met his, unflinching. I see you standing between us and a storm. I see Nakohe's people returning to us after generations apart. I see the knife made whole. She hesitated. And I see blood. Not just yours or ours, many people's blood, if the wrong path is taken. A chill ran through Nathan despite the warmth of the day. I'm just one man, Melly, a man on the run from his past. No, she shook her head firmly. You are the bridge. You carry pieces of both worlds within you. She pointed to his shirt pocket where the shell fragment rested. Just as you carry that piece of our history out without knowing its meaning. Before Nathan could respond, a sharp whistle echoed from outside. 3 short bursts followed by one long. Melly tensed. Ahote's warning, she explained, already moving toward the crevice. Someone approaches the valley. They exited the sacred chamber quickly, Melly carefully replacing the brush over the entrance. The descent back to the Wickiups was much faster than their earlier climb, with Melly leading Nathan along shortcuts he wouldn't have noticed on his own. They found Ahote and Dolly outside, both armed, Ahote with her rifle, Dolly with a bow, despite her single arm. Ahote pointed toward the northern entrance to the valley. Riders, she said tersely. 2, maybe 3. Moving slowly, searching. Nathan's heart sank. Thompson's men. They must have tracked me somehow. Impossible, Melly insisted. We covered our trail. We should hide in the caves, Dolly suggested, her calm voice belying the tension in her stance. Ahote shook her head. Too risky. They might see us moving across the open ground. She turned to Nathan. Your horse, would they recognize it? Nathan thought quickly. Penny's common enough. No distinctive markings. Good. Then you will be a cousin visiting from the south. No English. No leaving the Wickiup. Ahote's tone brooked no argument. She quickly organized their defense. Dolly gathered essential items in case they needed to flee. Melly moved Penny to a small corral behind the Wickiups where she would be less visible from a distance. Nathan was ushered into the main dwelling with strict instructions to remain silent. Through a small observation slit in the Wickiup wall, Nathan watched as 2 riders eventually came into view. They moved cautiously, rifles ready across their saddles. One was a heavy-set man with a full beard, unfamiliar to Nathan. The other made his blood run cold. Ezra Thompson sat tall in his saddle, his lean frame reminiscent of his brother, but lacking the captain's cruel mouth. Where James Thompson had been all sharp edges and barely contained violence, Ezra projected calculated control. His tailored clothes and polished gun belt spoke of wealth and influence, a man accustomed to getting his way through power rather than brute force. Nathan's hand moved instinctively to his empty holster. His gun was somewhere among his belongings, probably unloaded, not that it would help against 2 armed men while he was still weak from his wound. Outside, Ahote stepped forward to meet the riders, her rifle held casually but visibly. She spoke in Apache, her posture neither welcoming nor openly hostile. Ezra Thompson reined in his horse and responded in heavily accented but intelligible Apache. "Oh, hi, bye," a surprise that made Nathan's stomach tighten with apprehension. The conversation continued for several minutes, Thompson occasionally gesturing toward the Wickiups or the surrounding valley. Ahote's responses remained measured, her body language revealing nothing. Finally, she pointed north, beyond the valley, and said something that made Thompson nod thoughtfully. The 2 riders conferred briefly, then turned their horses. As they prepared to leave, Thompson's gaze swept the Wickiups one last time. For a heart-stopping moment, his eyes seemed to fix directly on the observation slit where Nathan watched. Then he tipped his hat to Ahote and rode away, his companion following. Only when the riders had disappeared from view did Ahote return to the Wickiup, her expression grim. What did he want? Nathan asked immediately. Information about a deserter, Ahote replied, setting her rifle aside. A man with a shoulder wound, riding a chestnut mare. Her eyes fixed on Nathan. He offered money for this information. Did he believe you? Perhaps, perhaps not. Ahote sat cross-legged by the cold fire pit. I told him we saw tracks heading north toward Nakohe's territory. That may buy us time, but they will return. Dolly entered with Melly close behind. How did they find this valley? Dolly asked, her voice troubled. Few outside our people know of its existence. Thompson knows more about the Apache than a white man should, Ahote said. He spoke our language poorly, but understood mine. He knew to ask about the hidden water. Nathan felt a cold certainty settling in his gut. The map, he said, it must show this valley, or at least hint at its location. He turned to Ahote. You said the tears of the sun refer to a spring that never runs dry. Could that be your stream here? Ahote's expression confirmed his suspicion. The spring that feeds our strum comes from deep within the earth. Even in the worst drought, it flows. Our people have protected its location for generations. And the healing caves Dolly mentioned? Behind the waterfall, half a mile upstream, Melly supplied, plants grow there that grow nowhere else, nourished by the mineral waters that seep through the rock. The pieces fell into place in Nathan's mind. That's what Thompson wants. Not gold, but something potentially more valuable. Water rights and rare medicinal plants in the middle of the desert, which he would claim by force as white men always do, Ahote said bitterly. Nathan couldn't disagree. The history of relations between whites and native peoples was written in broken promises and seized lands. He had seen it firsthand during his army years, the inexorable push westward, the displacement of tribes, the redrawing of maps to suit the newcomers' purposes. I should leave, he said finally. Draw them away from here. And go where? Ahote challenged. Back to the desert where you nearly died? To some town where Thompson's men will find you within days? I've survived this long. You've run this long, Ahote corrected. There's a difference. A heavy silence fell over the wickiup. Nathan felt the weight of their gazes. Ahote's challenging, Dolly's thoughtful, Melly's intense. These women had saved his life, and now he was entangled in their fate, as surely as they were in his. There is another way, Melly said suddenly. All eyes turned to her. We must complete the knife, bring together what was broken. Ahote sighed with exasperation. Now is not the time for old legends, Melly. It is exactly the time, Melly insisted. Nakohe's people still hold the blade. If our tribes reunite, we would be strong enough to protect the valley against Thompson and his kind. Nakohe's people have not spoken to ours in generations, Dolly reminded her gently. Not since the Great Division, when the knife was broken. But Nathan carries a piece of it, Melly pointed out, the piece that connects the handle to the blade. Is that not a sign? Nathan felt lost in their discussion of tribal history he knew nothing about. Who is Nakohe? He asked. Bear Gray, Ahote translated. A chief whose band separated from our tribe many years ago after a dispute over trading with white settlers. His group moved north into the higher mountains. They are said to be fierce warriors who allow no outsiders in their territory. And you think they would welcome us? Nathan asked skeptically. Not us, Melly said, but they might welcome the shell piece you carry. It is sacred to both our peoples, a symbol of the time before the division. The idea seemed far-fetched to Nathan, a desperate grasp at mythology in the face of very real danger. Yet he had no better alternative to offer. Running would only postpone the inevitable confrontation with Ezra Thompson. Staying would bring that confrontation to this hidden valley and the women who had saved him. Even if I agreed to this, he said slowly, how would we find Nakohe's people? You said yourself they allow no outsiders. I know the way, Melly said with quiet confidence. I've seen their camp in my dreams. Ahote made a sound of frustration. Dreams are not maps, Melly. They have been for me, the young woman countered. They led us to Nathan, did they not? Another silence fell as they considered their limited options. Finally, Dolly spoke, her voice soft but resolute. We should consult the spirits, she said, through the vision ceremony. Ahote frowned but didn't immediately dismiss the suggestion. Nathan looked between them, confused. What vision ceremony? A sacred ritual, Dolly explained. One that opens the mind to guidance from the ancestors. It might show us the path forward. Or it might waste precious time while Thompson gathers more men, Ahote argued. The ceremony requires only one night, Dolly countered, and Nathan needs more time to recover his strength before we can consider any journey. Ahote considered this, then nodded reluctantly. Tonight, then, if the spirits have wisdom to offer, we would be foolish to refuse it. The decision made, they spent the day in preparation. Dolly gathered specific herbs from her stores, grinding them into a fine powder that she wrapped carefully in a small leather pouch. Ahote checked and cleaned weapons. Not just her rifle, but also knives, a bow, and a short war club that Nathan hadn't seen before. Melly took Nathan to see Penny, who was contentedly grazing in the small corral behind the wickiups. The horse greeted him with a soft whicker, nosing his chest in familiar welcome. She is a good horse, Melly observed, stroking Penny's neck. Strong spirit. She saved my life more than once, Nathan agreed, grateful to see his faithful companion recovered from their desert ordeal. As they walked back toward the wickiups, Nathan studied Melly's profile. She was younger than the others, perhaps no more than 22, but there was an old wisdom in her eyes that belied her youth. These dreams of yours, he said carefully, have you always had them? Melly kept her gaze forward. Since I was a child, small things at first, knowing when it would rain or where a lost item could be found. But after the soldiers came, after I watched my parents die, she paused, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. The dreams became stronger, clearer. And your grandmother had the same gift. Melly nodded. She taught me not to fear it. She said dreams are the spirit's way of speaking to those who know how to listen. A small, sad smile touched her lips. Before she died, she told me I would have to be strong when the man between worlds came, that there would be difficult choices ahead. What kind of choices? Nathan asked, a sense of foreboding settling over him. Melly finally looked at him directly, her dark eyes serious. Between the path of blood and the path of healing, between the past and the future. She touched his arm lightly. You carry much guilt, Nathan read. It clouds your vision like dust in the wind. Before he could respond to this uncomfortably accurate assessment, Ahote called them back to the wickiup. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western cliffs, casting long shadows across the valley floor. The vision ceremony began as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Inside the main wickiup, Ahote had cleared the central space with meticulous care, sweeping the earthen floor with a bundle of sweetgrass that released a cleansing fragrance with each stroke. She laid down fresh buffalo hides in a perfect circle around the fire pit, their placement precise and deliberate. The circle represents the hoop of life, she explained to Nathan, noticing his attentive gaze. Unbroken, without beginning or end. 4 stone markers, each a different color and shape, had been placed at cardinal points around the circle. The eastern stone was white quartz for the rising sun and new beginnings. The southern stone was red sandstone representing growth and passion. The western stone was black obsidian, symbolizing introspection in the setting sun. The northern stone was yellow jasper for wisdom and the cold winds. Each stone bore symbols etched into its surface, spirals, handprints, animal figures, and geometric patterns that told stories Nathan couldn't yet read, but sensed were ancient and significant. Dolly placed small bundles of herbs beside each stone, sage, cedar, sweetgrass, and tobacco, the 4 sacred plants of their tradition. The 4 directions each have their power, their medicine, Dolly said softly as she worked. East brings vision, south brings warmth, west brings reflection, north brings endurance. We need all 4 to find our way. Over the small fire, a clay pot with intricate symbols around its rim simmered. Inside was a brew Dolly had prepared with careful reverence, measuring each ingredient with experienced fingers. The liquid was deep amber, releasing a complex aroma that was simultaneously earthy, floral, and somehow ancient, like the desert itself distilled into essence. The 3 women had dressed with purpose for the ceremony. Dolly wore a simple buckskin dress adorned with hundreds of tiny shell beads that clicked softly like raindrops when she moved. Around her neck hung a medicine pouch containing herbs known only to healers. Ahote had donned a necklace of polished stones in the 4 sacred colors, each stone representing an ancestor whose wisdom she now carried. Her hair, normally braided tightly, had been loosened and adorned with a single eagle feather. Most striking was Melly, whose transformation was complete. Her face had been painted with ochre lines that seemed to reshape her features entirely, accentuating her cheekbones with lightning patterns, her forehead with crescent moons, her chin with dots representing stars. Around her eyes, she wore a mask of white clay that made her dark irises appear to float like midnight pools. She had tied small bells to her ankles that made gentle music with each subtle movement. "The paint helps the spirits recognize me," she explained when she caught Nathan staring, "and helps me recognize them." Nathan felt distinctly out of place in his worn trail clothes, but Ehote shook her head when he mentioned it. "The spirits see beyond clothing," she said. "They look at what a person carries inside." Nevertheless, she marked his forehead with a single line of red ochre. "So they know you come seeking." He was instructed to sit at the western point of the circle with the three women taking the remaining positions. The western position, Ahote explained, was fitting for him, the place of introspection, of looking backward before moving forward, of death that precedes rebirth. "What happens now?" he asked quietly, uncertain of his role in this unfamiliar ritual. "We drink the sacred tea," Dolly explained, carefully ladling the steaming liquid into 4 clay cups decorated with symbols matching those on the stones. "This medicine has been used by our people since before memory. It connects us to the spirit world, to our ancestors, to the wisdom that lives in all things." She handed him a cup with both reverence and caution. "Drink slowly. Let each sip find its place within you before taking another. The visions come differently to each person. Some see with their eyes, some hear with their hearts, some know with their bones. Do not fight what comes." Before they drank, Ahote took a small wooden bowl and placed a pinch of tobacco inside it. She offered it to the 4 directions, then up to Father Sky and down to Mother Earth. "We give thanks for this guidance," she said in Apache, then translated for Nathan. "We ask for clear eyes and open hearts. We seek the path that serves all our relations." She touched a glowing ember to the Twaking, and as the smoke rose, they each wafted it toward themselves with cupped hands, bringing the prayers into their bodies, purifying their senses for what was to come. Nathan eyed the cup handed to him with apprehension. "Is it safe?" A rare smile crossed Ahote's stern features. "For someone who faced death in the desert a few days ago, you worry about a cup of tea?" "The effects are strong but temporary," Dolly assured him. "Your dreams will be vivid, and you may see things hidden from ordinary sight. But your body will remain here, safe with us." Nathan hesitated, then nodded. He had come this far on a journey that defied rational explanation. One more step into the unknown seemed fitting. They drank together after Ahote spoke words in Apache that Nathan understood to be a prayer or invocation. The tea was bitter and earthy, with an aftertaste like pine sap. Nathan forced himself to drink it all, following the example of the others. For a time, nothing happened. The fire crackled, shadows danced on the wicky-up walls, and a night bird called somewhere in the darkness outside. Then gradually the shadows began to move independently of the fire, swirling in patterns that seemed almost intentional. Nathan blinked, trying to clear his vision, but the movement persisted. Colors intensified. The red of the fire became as vivid as fresh blood. The browns and blacks of the wicky-up walls deepened until they seemed to contain entire landscapes within their textures. He heard Ahote begin a low, rhythmic chant, soon joined by Dolly's softer voice and Maylee's higher one. The women's faces blurred and shifted in the firelight, sometimes appearing as they were, sometimes transforming into older or younger versions of themselves. Then the visions began in earnest. Nathan found himself standing on a high ridge overlooking a vast desert landscape. The sun blazed overhead, but he felt no heat, only a sense of profound clarity. Below, he could see the hidden valley like a green jewel nestled among barren rocks. Beyond it stretched an endless expanse of sand and stone, broken occasionally by rocky outcroppings or dry riverbeds. To the north, a line of mountains rose, their peaks capped with snow despite the desert heat. Nathan felt drawn toward them, as if they contained something he desperately needed to find. As he watched, the landscape began to change. The green of the valley spread outward, following the course of a silver stream that grew wider and stronger. Trees appeared where none had been before, creating patches of shade. Small figures moved across the transformed landscape, people working, building, living in harmony with the renewed earth. Then a shadow fell across the vision. From the east, a dark cloud approached, not a natural formation, but a roiling mass of smoke and dust. Within it, Nathan could make out the shapes of men on horseback, their rifles glinting in the sun. They rode toward the valley with single-minded purpose, leaving destruction in their wake. The vision shifted again. Nathan now stood in a circle of stones on a mountaintop. Before him, an elderly Apache man sat cross-legged, his face deeply lined with age and experience. In his hands, he held a ceremonial knife, complete, unbroken, its handle inlaid with iridescent shell that caught the sunlight. The old man extended the knife toward Nathan, his eyes filled with a question Nathan couldn't quite grasp. When Nathan reached for the knife, his hand passed through it as if it were made of smoke. The old man's expression turned sorrowful. He spoke words Nathan couldn't hear, then faded from view, leaving only the knife floating in the air between them. The vision dissolved, replaced by a scene of violence that Nathan recognized with sick dread. The Apache village burning, women and children fleeing in terror, soldiers firing indiscriminately. But this time Nathan saw it from above, a witness rather than a participant. He saw himself confronting Captain Thompson, saw the fatal shot, saw himself helping survivors escape. But he also saw something he hadn't known: a small group of Apache warriors returning too late, finding their village destroyed, following the survivors' trail until they reached an older woman leading children toward the mountains. His younger self was long gone by then, unaware of this epilogue to the tragedy. One warrior cradled a broken knife in his hands, its blade separated from the handle, with a piece missing from where they should connect. The warrior looked up, and Nathan recognized with a shock that it was a younger version of the old man from the mountain vision. Before he could make sense of this connection, the vision changed again. He found himself in a small clearing he didn't recognize. A young Apache girl, no more than 5 or 6 years old, sat playing with stones arranged in peculiar patterns. She looked up as if sensing his presence, though he knew he wasn't physically there. "You kept your promise," she said in perfect English, surprising him. "You helped them escape." Nathan knelt before the child, recognition dawning. "Kayla?" She nodded, her serious eyes far older than her years. "My sister waits for you by the river. She has always been waiting, even when she didn't know it." The child arranged the stones in a circle. "The knife must be whole again. The circle must be complete." "I don't understand," Nathan admitted. "You will." Kayla placed one final stone, completing the circle. "Some debts can never be repaid, but some gifts can be passed forward." She looked up at him with startling clarity. "You saved me so I could save my sisters. Now they will save you so you can save the waters." Before he could question her further, the vision dissolved into swirling darkness. He was back in the desert, dying of thirst. But this time no one came to save him. He felt his life ebbing away under the merciless sun, his regrets weighing him down like stones. Then 3 shadows fell across him. Not the 3 women who had saved him in reality, but 3 spectral figures with faces like carved wood, ageless and inhuman. They spoke in unison, their voices resonating directly in his mind. The knife must be made whole. The waters must be protected. The man between worlds must choose his path. Nathan tried to ask what they meant, but no sound emerged from his parched throat. The figures began to fade, their final words lingering in the desert air. Blood calls to blood. Water calls to water. Find what was lost. The vision collapsed into swirling darkness, through which fragments of images flashed too quickly to comprehend. A waterfall concealing a cave entrance, an eagle soaring over mountains, a woman weeping beside a small grave, Ezra Thompson standing over a map with men Nathan didn't recognize, a ceremonial circle where 2 groups of Apache faced each other with wary expressions. When Nathan returned to himself, he was lying on his back in the wickiup. The fire burned down to embers. His body felt leaden, his mouth dry as paper. Dolly knelt beside him, offering water, which he accepted gratefully. Slowly he sat up, looking around the dim interior. Ahote sat with her back against a support pole, her eyes closed but her posture suggesting wakefulness rather than sleep. Melly was nowhere to be seen. "How long?" Nathan managed to ask. Since the visions began? Perhaps 4 hours, Dolly replied softly. The night is still young. Melly? Outside, her visions were difficult. She needed air and stars. Nathan nodded, understanding the feeling. The visions had left him shaken, filled with impressions and symbols he couldn't fully interpret, but that felt heavy with significance. Did you see my saying? See? He asked Dolly, unsure how to articulate his question more specifically. She seemed to understand nonetheless. Each of us walks a different path in the spirit world. I saw healing where there has been wounding. I saw waters flowing together after long separation. She studied his face carefully. What did you see, Nathan Reed? He described his visions as best he could, from the transforming landscape to the old man with the knife to the three spectral figures and their cryptic message. Dolly listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as if his words confirmed something she already knew. When he finished, Ahote spoke without opening her eyes. The old man you saw was Nakohe, the bear gray himself. Nathan turned toward her in surprise. You know him? I have never met him, Ahote clarified, finally looking at Nathan. But his appearance is well known among our people. He would be very old now, perhaps 80 summers. In my vision, he held a complete knife, Nathan said. But then I saw him younger after the village attack, with only the blade part. Ahote and Dolly exchanged a significant look. The knife was broken during a council many years ago, Dolly explained. Half remained with our family, half with Nakohe's band. It symbolized the division of our tribe. And the shell inlay piece I've been carrying would have connected the two halves, Ahote confirmed. It was thought lost forever. The pieces were falling into place in Nathan's mind, forming a pattern he couldn't dismiss as coincidence. His random possession of the shell fragment, his chance encounter with the three women descended from the very village he'd failed to protect, the visions that seemed to point toward reunion between long-separated Apache bands, it all suggested a purpose beyond his understanding. The wiki-up flap opened and Melly entered, her face washed clean of the ceremonial paint, but her eyes still holding the otherworldly look of one not fully returned from the spirit realm. You saw Nakohe, she said to Nathan without preamble, and the three spirits of the valley. Yes, he confirmed, not bothering to ask how she knew. They spoke of making the knife whole and protecting the waters. Melly nodded, settling cross-legged beside the dying fire. I saw the same, and I saw the way to Nakohe's camp in the mountains. We must go there before the next full moon. That gives us less than 2 weeks, Ahote said with a frown. Nathan is still recovering from his wound, and we would need supplies for such a journey. We have enough, Melly insisted, and Nathan is stronger than you think. The spirits have shown the path. We must follow it. Nathan watched the interplay between the three women, aware that his presence had disrupted what had likely been a long-established dynamic among them. Ahote, the practical leader, Dolly, the thoughtful healer, Melly, the visionary dreamer. Each had their role, their strengths. Now they were being asked to incorporate an outsider, a white man no less, into their carefully balanced world. What exactly would this journey accomplish, he asked. Even if we find Nakohe and reunite the knife, how does that protect the valley from Thompson and his men? Alone, our small band cannot defend against many armed men, Ahote explained reluctantly, as if the admission pained her. But Nakohe's people are said to number over 100, with many warriors among them. United with them, we might have a chance. And you believe they would welcome this reunion? After generations of separation? The division was never meant to be permanent, Dolly said. It began as a disagreement over how to interact with white settlers. Nakohe's group believed in maintaining complete separation. Our ancestors believed selective trade and diplomacy might ensure survival. Her expression turned wry. History suggests neither approach worked perfectly. Nathan considered the enormity of what they were proposing, a dangerous journey through unfamiliar territory, seeking a potentially hostile Apache band, all based on visions induced by a ceremonial tea. By any rational measure, it was madness. Yet what was the alternative? To run again, always one step ahead of Ezra Thompson until luck or strength failed him? To bring destruction to this hidden valley and the women who had saved his life? If we do this, he said slowly. We go prepared for trouble. Not just from Nakahe's people, but from Thompson. If he's still searching these mountains, we could encounter his men. Ahote nodded, a glint of approval in her eyes at his practical assessment. We will prepare. But first, rest. The vision tea leaves the body weak for a time. Tomorrow we can begin planning in earnest. As the others settled for sleep, Nathan found himself too restless for slumber despite his physical exhaustion. He slipped outside, careful not to disturb the women. The night was clear, the stars impossibly bright in the desert sky. Nathan walked toward the stream, drawn by the sound of water over stones. He sat on a boulder by the bank, letting the gentle music wash over him. He didn't hear Melly approach until she spoke from behind him. The stars are clearer here than anywhere else, she said softly. Our grandmother said it was because we are closer to the spirit world in this valley. Nathan made room for her on the boulder, and she sat beside him, her slight frame barely disturbing the space between them. Your visions troubled you, he observed. Melly nodded, her gaze fixed on the starlit water. I saw many possible futures. Not all were kind. Do you believe we can change these futures, or are they fixed? The path branches many times, she replied after a thoughtful pause. Each choice creates new possibilities, closes others. She turned to look at him directly. In some futures, you die trying to protect us. In others, you betray us to save yourself. Nathan flinched at the blunt assessment. In which do you believe is more likely? Melly studied his face in the starlight. Neither. I believe you will surprise even yourself, Nathan Reed. She reached out and touched his shirt pocket lightly, where the shell fragment rested. You have carried a piece of our history without knowing its meaning. Perhaps you also carry a piece of our future. The simple statement, delivered without drama or emphasis, nevertheless fell heavy as a stone into the quiet night. Nathan had no response that wouldn't sound hollow or defensive. Instead, he asked, Tell me about your sister, the little girl I helped escape that day. A flash of pain crossed Melly's features, quickly controlled. Kala, she was only 4 summers old when the soldiers came. You helped her and our grandmother reach the safety of the trees. Melly's voice softened with memory. She was brave and quick, even so young. She survived the attack, but the journey afterward was hard. Food was scarce, water scarcer. Sickness came with the winter rains. She paused. She died in our grandmother's arms before we found this valley. I'm sorry, Nathan said, the words inadequate but sincere. She is buried here, Melly continued, gesturing toward a rise near the eastern cliff, in the place where the first morning sun touches the earth. Our grandmother chose it specially for her. Nathan followed her gaze to the small rise, barely visible in the darkness, but clearly a place of significance. You visit her, he said, remembering his glimpse of Melly slipping away alone. She nodded. I tell her of my dreams, of our life here, of you. At his startled look, she added, she would want to know about the man who tried to save her. I failed, Nathan said, the old guilt rising like bile. No, Melly's voice was firm. You gave her months she would not otherwise have had. Months with her family, with the ski in the earth. No life is measured only by its length. Melly knelt beside the small grave, marked with a circle of white stones and a wooden post carved with symbols. She removed the pouch from around her neck, the one containing Kayla's moccasin, and held it between her palms. My sister was gifted, she said quietly. Even at 4 summers, she saw things others missed. The day before the soldiers came, she told our grandmother she dreamed of a coyote with kind eyes who would lead us to safety. Melly looked up at Nathan. Our people do not believe in coincidences, Nathan Reed. Kala saw you before you even arrived. Nathan knelt beside him, the weight of this revelation settling around him like a mantle. I don't understand how any of this works, the visions, the connections, but I know what I saw that day. I know what I did and didn't do. In our tradition, those who pass continue to guide us, Melly explained, replacing the pouch around her neck. Kala guides me through my dreams. She showed me where to find you in the desert. She shows me glimpses of what may come. A small, sad smile touched her lips. She was the bravest of us all. The wisdom in her words, coming from someone so young, yet so deeply acquainted with loss, humbled Nathan. He had carried his guilt like a protective shell, using it to justify his isolation, his constant flight. Melly and her sisters had suffered greater losses, yet had found ways to create meaning from their pain. Doli through healing, Ahote through leadership, Melly through her connection to the spirit world. Dawn comes soon, Melly said after a comfortable silence. Tomorrow we begin preparations for the journey. You should rest while you can. As they walked back toward the Wickiups, a question that had been nagging at Nathan finally found voice. Why did your grandmother believe the three of you should marry the man from her vision? Me? The concept still bewildered him, so far removed from his understanding of marriage. Melly's soft laugh surprised him. Our ways are not your ways, Nathan Reed. For our people, marriage is not always what white people think it is. Sometimes it is a joining of spirits, of purposes. She glanced at him. Our grandmother saw that our fates would be bound with yours, that together we would face what none of us could face alone. And you believe this? All three of you? Melly considered the question seriously. Ahote believes in survival above all. Doli believes in healing what is broken. I believe in the patterns that connect all things. She stopped, turning to face him fully. Do we believe you are meant to be our husband in the way white men understand marriage? Perhaps not. But do we believe our paths are joined with yours toward some purpose greater than any of us? Yes. It was not quite an answer, yet somehow it satisfied something in Nathan. Not everything needed a name or a familiar structure to be real and meaningful. As they reached the Wickiup, Melly paused once more. When we journey to Nakohe's camp, we will face dangers from without and within. Trust what you saw in your vision, Nathan. The knife must be made whole. The waters must be protected. The man between worlds must choose his path. With that cryptic reminder, she slipped inside, leaving Nathan alone with the fading stars and the first hint of dawn lightening the eastern sky. Tomorrow they would begin preparing for a journey that might lead to salvation or destruction. Tonight, however, Nathan felt something unfamiliar taking root in his soul. Not quite peace, not quite belonging, but perhaps their distant cousins, purpose and connection. He touched the shell fragment in his pocket, wondering at the strange turns of fate that had brought him here, to this hidden valley, to these remarkable women, to this moment of decision. The man between worlds must choose his path. For the first time in 5 years, Nathan Reed was ready to stop running and find out where that path might lead. Dawn broke over Shadow Valley with pale golden light that gradually warmed to amber as the sun cleared the eastern cliffs. For 3 days, preparations for the journey had consumed them, gathering supplies, mending clothing, preparing medicines, and planning their route through the dangerous terrain that separated them from Nakohe's people. Nathan's strength had returned more rapidly than even Doli had predicted. His wound had closed cleanly, leaving a puckered scar that pulled slightly when he raised his arm but caused little pain. Each morning he exercised methodically, rebuilding muscles weakened by fever and inactivity. Each afternoon he worked alongside the women, learning their ways, contributing what skills he possessed. On the morning of their departure, Nathan woke before the others. He slipped from the Wickiup into the crisp dawn air, drawn to the stream where he'd taken to performing his morning ablutions. The cold water helped clear his mind, preparing him for whatever the day might bring. As he dried his face on a scrap of cloth, he caught movement from the corner of his eye. Melly, walking purposefully toward the small rise where her sister lay buried. She carried something in her hands that Nathan couldn't identify from a distance. Respecting her privacy, he turned away, only to find Ahote watching him from near the Wickiups. Her dark eyes missed nothing, he had learned. She approached, carrying his gun belt with holstered revolver. You will need this, she said without preamble, extending the belt toward him. I have cleaned and loaded it. Nathan accepted the familiar weight with mixed feelings. The weapon represented both protection and a connection to his violent past. Thank you. Ahote studied him with her penetrating gaze. You still doubt our path. It wasn't a question, but Nathan answered anyway. Not doubt exactly, but I wonder if I'm leading you into greater danger than if I'd simply gone on alone. We choose our own path, Ahote replied firmly, as we chose to save you from the desert, as we choose to seek Nakohe's people now. Her expression softened slightly. The vision ceremony showed us all the same truth. Our futures are bound together, whether we wish it or not. Before Nathan could respond, Dolly emerged from the wickiup carrying leather packs filled with their traveling provisions. Despite her missing arm, she handled the awkward bundles with practiced ease. The sun rises, she observed. We should begin our journey while the day is young. Melly returned from her sister's grave, her face serene though her eyes held a distant sadness. She carried a small pouch that she tucked carefully into her clothing without explanation. They ate a light breakfast of corn cakes and dried berries, then secured the wickiups as best they could against weather and animal intrusions. There was no telling how long their journey might take. Perhaps a week to reach Nakohe's camp, perhaps longer if they encountered difficulties. As they prepared to leave the valley, Nathan felt a strange reluctance. In just a few days, this hidden place had begun to feel like a sanctuary, the closest thing to a home he'd known since deserting the army. The three women, too, had become more than simply his rescuers. They were, what? Friends seemed too casual a word. Companions, perhaps, or, as Melly had suggested, people whose fates had become mysteriously intertwined with his own. Ahote led the way, guiding them along a narrow trail that wound up the northern cliff face. Dolly followed, then Nathan leading Penny, with Melly bringing up the rear. The mare carried most of their provisions, leaving the humans unburdened for the steep climb. The ascent was grueling. The trail switchbacked across the cliff, sometimes narrowing to a precarious ledge barely wide enough for passage. Penny balked occasionally at the more difficult sections, requiring Nathan's patient coaxing to continue. By midday, they had reached the top of the cliff. Below them, Shadow Valley spread like a green oasis amid the harshness of the surrounding desert. From this height, Nathan could better appreciate the valley's hidden nature, how the surrounding cliffs shielded it from casual observation, how the stream had carved a sanctuary in the unforgiving landscape. "We will return," Melly said quietly, noticing his lingering gaze. "The valley waits for us." They continued northward, the terrain gradually changing as they traveled. The stark desert gave way to scrubland, then to scattered piñon pines that offered welcome shade. The air cooled as they gained elevation, the scent of pine resin replacing the dusty aroma of the desert. That night, they made camp in a small depression sheltered by boulders. Ahote insisted they build only the smallest of fires, just enough to warm their food before extinguishing it completely. "Thompson's men may be watching the mountains," she explained. "A fire at night is visible for miles." They ate a simple meal of jerky and dried fruit, speaking little, each lost in their own thoughts about the journey ahead. Nathan took first watch, positioning himself on a boulder overlooking their back trail, his revolver ready at his side. The night passed uneventfully, each taking their turn at watch. When dawn broke, they continued their journey, Melly now taking the lead. She moved with confident purpose, occasionally pausing to examine landmarks only she seemed to recognize from her visions. On the third day of travel, as they navigated a particularly dense section of pine forest, Ahote suddenly raised her hand, signaling a halt. She cocked her head, listening intently, then motioned them off the trail into the shelter of a large boulder. "Riders," she whispered, "coming from the east." Nathan strained his ears and caught it, the distant but unmistakable sound of hoofbeats and men's voices. He drew his revolver, checking it automatically. "How many?" he asked. Ahote shook her head. "Cannot tell. At least 3, maybe more." They pressed themselves against the boulder, Penny standing quietly behind them and well-trained enough not to whine or stamp. The sounds grew louder, then began to fade as the riders passed to the east of their position without intersecting their path. When the forest had been silent for several minutes, Ahote cautiously led them back to the trail. "Thompson's men," she said with certainty. "They search the mountains in patterns, like hunting dogs." "They haven't found Nakohe's camp yet," Melly observed, "or they wouldn't still be searching." "Unless they've already found it and are circling back," Nathan suggested grimly. The possibility hung over them as they continued northward, now moving with greater caution. They avoided ridgelines where they might be silhouetted against the sky, kept to cover when possible, and listened constantly for sounds of pursuit. That night they made a cold camp, not risking even the smallest fire. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped sharply, a reminder of their increasing elevation. They huddled together for warmth, sharing blankets and body heat. "How much farther?" Nathan asked Melly as they settled in for the night. "2 days, perhaps 3, she replied. "We must cross the high ridge tomorrow, then descend into the valley beyond. Now Kohei's people make their camp near a lake fed by snowmelt. And you're certain of this? From your visions?" Melly's eyes gleamed in the darkness. "As certain as I was of finding you in the desert." Nathan couldn't argue with that. Whatever her gift was, prescience, spiritual connection, or simply extraordinary intuition, it had led them to him when logic suggested no one could have found him in time. The next day brought them to the high ridge Melly had mentioned. It was a forbidding barrier of stone and sparse vegetation, with no obvious path across its jagged spine. They searched for hours before finding a narrow pass that seemed manageable. The crossing was treacherous. Loose shale slid beneath their feet, threatening to send them tumbling down the steep slope. Penny struggled, eyes rolling with fear at the unstable footing. Nathan led her with gentle words and a firm hand, while Ahote took the more precarious outer edge of the path, ready to steady the mare if needed. They were halfway across when disaster struck. A section of the path crumbled beneath Dolly's feet as she navigated a particularly narrow stretch. With a startled cry, she began to slide toward the edge, unable to catch herself with her single arm. Nathan lunged forward, abandoning Penny's reins to grab Dolly's wrist. For a heart-stopping moment, her weight nearly pulled him over with her. Then Melly was there, anchoring his belt, and Ahote bracing Penny to prevent the panicked horse from making the situation worse. Together they pulled Dolly back to safety. She trembled with delayed shock, her normally composed features pale beneath their copper tone. "Thank you," she breathed, looking from Nathan to Melly and back again. "I saw the rocks falling in my mind, but could not stop it from happening." They rested briefly to allow Dolly to recover, then continued across the ridge with redoubled caution. By late afternoon, they had reached the other side and began their descent into the valley beyond. The landscape changed dramatically on this side of the mountains of Soins. The northern slopes caught more moisture, supporting lush forests of pine and aspen. Small streams crisscrossed their path, fed by the snowpack still visible on the highest peaks. The air felt different too, cleaner, cooler, rich with the scent of growing things. That evening they made camp beside one of the streams. Ahote judged they were far enough from Thompson's search area to risk a small fire, which lifted their spirits considerably. Dolly prepared a hot meal, the first since leaving Shadow Valley, and they ate with the simple pleasure of travelers who have overcome a significant obstacle. As they finished their meal, Melly suddenly stiffened, her head turning sharply toward the darkening forest. The others fell silent, following her gaze but seeing nothing in the gathering shadows. "We are watched," she said quietly. Nathan's hand moved to his revolver, but Ahote shook her head in warning. "If they are Nakohe's scouts, weapons will only provoke them." Instead, she stood slowly and spoke in a clear voice, using the Apache language. The words were unfamiliar to Nathan, but the tone was one of peaceful greeting. No response came from the forest. After a moment, Ahote repeated her words, then added something else, a name perhaps, or a formal identification. This time, a voice answered from the darkness. The exchange continued for several minutes, Ahote's posture gradually relaxing as the conversation progressed. Finally, 3 figures emerged from the forest, Apache warriors, armed with rifles and knives. Their faces were painted with red ochre stripes, their expressions wary but not overtly hostile. The apparent leader, a tall man with a single eagle feather in his hair, addressed Ahote directly. She responded, then gestured to her companions. When she indicated Nathan, the warrior's expressions hardened noticeably. "What's happening?" Nathan asked quietly, keeping his hands carefully visible and away from his weapon. "These are Nakohe's scouts," Dolly explained in an undertone. "They question why we bring a white man to their territory." The conversation continued, growing more animated. Melly joined in, speaking rapidly and with obvious passion. She touched the pouch she carried, which seemed to cause some reaction among the warriors. Finally, the leader made a cutting gesture with his hand, silencing further discussion. He spoke to Ahote, his tone final. "They will take us to Nakohe," Ahote translated for Nathan. "But you must be blindfolded, and they will bind your hands." Nathan hesitated only briefly before nodding his agreement. He had come too far to balk at precautions that, from the Apache perspective, were entirely reasonable. One of the warriors approached with a strip of cloth. Nathan submitted to the blindfolding, then allowed his hands to be tied in front of him. Not cruelly tight, but secure enough to prevent any sudden movements. Someone took Penny's reins. A hand, Dolly's he thought from the touch, guided his elbow. Then they were moving, stumbling occasionally on the uneven ground as they traveled in darkness. The journey continued for what felt like hours. Without sight, Nathan's other senses heightened. He heard the whisper of pine needles overhead, the occasional call of a night bird, the soft footfalls of their captors. He smelled wood smoke eventually, suggesting they were approaching the camp. Voices increased in number and volume. The sounds of a substantial encampment surrounded them. Children calling, dogs barking, the domestic noises of cooking and conversation. Then these sounds hushed, replaced by murmurs that followed their small procession like a wave. They stopped. The blindfold was removed from Nathan's eyes, though his hands remained bound. He blinked in the sudden light of multiple campfires, gradually making out his surroundings. They stood in a large clearing ringed by pine trees. Wickiups and typies formed a rough circle around a central fire pit where a substantial blaze burned. Perhaps 50 or 60 people had gathered to observe the newcomers, their faces reflecting a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and when they looked at Nathan, outright hostility. Across the fire sat an elderly man on a raised platform of sorts, not quite a throne, but clearly a position of honor. His face was deeply lined, his hair white with age, but his dark eyes remained sharp and alert. He wore a necklace of bear claws and a blanket decorated with intricate geometric patterns, despite the relative warmth of the evening. Nathan knew without being told that this was Nakohe, the bear gray himself. The old chief studied them in silence for a long moment, his gaze lingering on each face before moving to the next. When he finally spoke, his voice was surprisingly strong, carrying easily across the clearing. Ahote responded with what seemed like formal greeting. Then Dolly added something, her tone respectful but firm. Melly stepped forward last, removing the small pouch from her clothing. She opened it carefully, revealing its contents to Nakoe, but not to the watching crowd. The old man's expression changed subtly, a widening of the eyes, a slight parting of lips. He spoke a single word that caused a ripple of reaction through the assembled tribe. "What did he say?" Nathan whispered to Dolly, who stood closest to him. "The word for impossible," she replied softly. "Melly has shown him the shell piece you carried." Nakohe spoke again, this time gesturing for Melly to approach. She did so without hesitation, crossing to the old man and kneeling before him. They conversed quietly, the chief occasionally glancing at Nathan and with an unreadable expression. After what seemed an eternity, Nakohe raised his hand. A younger man stepped forward from behind the chief's seat, carrying a wooden box decorated with symbols similar to those Nathan had seen in the sacred cave. The chief opened the box and removed something that gleamed in the firelight, the blade portion of the ceremonial knife, its metal surface engraved with designs that caught and reflected the flames. Beside it in the box lay the handle, its end jagged where it had broken, a hollow space visible where the shell inlay piece would fit. Melly presented the shell fragment in her open palm. With hands that trembled slightly with age, Nakohe took it, examining it closely before placing it against the broken handle. The fit was perfect, the colors and patterns aligning exactly. A murmur ran through the watching crowd. Nakohe spoke again, this time addressing the assembly. Though Nathan couldn't understand the words, the tone conveyed significance, a pronouncement of some kind. When the chief finished speaking, two warriors approached Nathan. One cut the bindings from his wrists, while the other presented him with a cup of what appeared to be water. "Drink," Dolly instructed quietly. "It is an offering of peace." Nathan accepted the cup and drank, aware that every eye in the camp was fixed upon him. The liquid was indeed water, but with a slightly mineral taste that suggested it came from a mountain spring. Nakoe spoke once more, this time directly to Nathan, though in Apache. "He welcomes you to their camp," Ehote translated. "He says you have carried a sacred piece of their history without knowing its meaning. He asks why you have come." Nathan looked at the three women who had brought him here, then back to the aged chief. "Tell him I come seeking alliance," he said slowly, choosing his words with care. "Tell him that enemies approach who threaten the hidden waters, and all who protect them." As Ehote translated, Nathan saw understanding dawn in the old man's eyes. Nakohe responded at length, his gnarled hands occasionally gesturing for emphasis. He says they have seen white men searching the mountains, Ahote relayed. Men with many guns and hard eyes. His scouts have watched them but avoided contact. She paused as Nakohe continued. He asks how you know of these men. Nathan took a deep breath. Tell him the truth. All of it. For the next hour, through Ahote's translation, Nathan told his story to Nakohe and the assembled tribe. He spoke of his time in the army, of Captain Thompson's attack on the village, of his failed attempt to prevent the massacre, and his successful effort to help some escape. He described killing Thompson and his years on the run, culminating in his near death in the desert and rescue by the three women. He explained about the map Thompson had carried in his brother Ezra's pursuit, the hidden valley and its precious water, and the vision ceremony that had led them to seek Nakohe's people. Throughout the telling, the old chief listened impassively, his face revealing nothing of his thoughts. The crowd, too, remained silent, though Nathan sensed shifting emotions from hostility to curiosity to something less easily defined. When Nathan finished, Nakohe closed his eyes briefly, as if in deep thought or perhaps communion with unseen forces. When he opened them again, he spoke with deliberate care, looking not just at Nathan, but at Ahote, Dolis, and Meli in turn. The chief says your coming was foretold, Ahote translated, her voice steady despite the weight of the words. Not just by our grandmother, but by their own wise ones. The breaking of the knife generations ago was meant to be healed when the waters faced their greatest threat. She paused as Nakohe continued. He says tonight they will hold council to decide what must be done. The chief made a gesture of dismissal, not unkind but final. Warriors led Nathan and the women to a small teepee at the edge of the clearing, indicating they were to wait there. Food and water were brought, simple but adequate fare that they ate in relative silence, each processing the events of the evening in their own way. Will they help us? Nathan finally asked when they had finished eating. Dolly's expression was thoughtful. Nakohe is wise, but cautious. He has kept his people safe for many years by avoiding conflict with whites. But he recognized the shell piece, Meli pointed out. He knows the prophecy. Knowing and acting are different paths, Ahote observed. He must consider his people's safety above ancient stories. They settled in to wait, the hours stretching long as the sounds of discussion drifted from the central council fire. Occasionally voices were raised in what seemed like disagreement, but mostly the tone remained measured, deliberative. Nathan dozed eventually, exhausted from the day's journey and the emotional strain of their arrival. He woke to Meli's light touch on his arm. Dawn light filtered through the teepee covering. They have decided, she said simply. They emerged to find the camp already active despite the early hour. Warriors prepared weapons, women packed provisions, children were assembled into groups under the watchful eyes of elders. Nakohe sat by the central fire, looking even older in the harsh morning light. He motioned for them to join him, indicating they should sit on mats placed before his seat. When they were settled, he spoke directly to Nathan, this time in heavily accented but understandable English. I learned the white man's tongue many years ago, he explained, his voice like dry leaves rustling. I was a scout for the army before I became chief. I saw how they fought, how they thought. His gaze was penetrating, assessing. You fought against your own people to save ours. The direct question caught Nathan off guard. He had expected more ceremony, more translation. He considered his answer carefully. Because what they were doing was wrong, he said finally. Because women and children are not enemies, no matter what color their skin. Nakohe nodded slowly, as if the answer confirmed something he already knew. My council has spoken through the night. Some say we should move our camp, go deeper into the mountains where white men cannot find us. Others say we should fight, protect the sacred waters as our ancestors charged us to do. He paused. I have listened to all voices. Now I have decided. The old chief reached for the wooden box containing the broken knife. He removed the handle and the blade, placing them before him. With great ceremony, he took the shell inlay piece from a small pouch at his belt and positioned it between the two broken pieces. Long ago, when our tribes divided, this knife was broken. It was said that when the pieces were rejoined, our people would face a great challenge and a great choice. His weathered hands hovered over the fragments. The man who carried the missing piece would stand between worlds. belonging fully to neither but understanding both. Through him, the waters would be saved or lost forever. Nakohe looked up, meeting Nathan's eyes directly. We will help you protect the hidden valley, not just for your three women and their small band, but for all our people and for the generations to come. Water in the desert is life itself. Relief washed through Nathan. Thank you, he said simply. Do not thank me yet, the old chief cautioned. First we must defeat these men who seek to take what is not theirs. And you, Nathan Reed, must complete your journey between worlds. Before Nathan could ask what he meant, Nakohe turned to Ahote. He spoke rapidly in Apache, giving what seemed to be instructions. She nodded, responding with formal words that sounded like a pledge or promise. 20 warriors will accompany us back to Shadow Valley, she explained to Nathan when the exchange was complete. We leave within the hour. As the camp bustled with preparations, Dolly approached Nakohe with a respectful gesture. She spoke quietly, indicating Nathan's shoulder with a slight movement of her head. The old chief listened, then nodded and said something to a younger woman nearby. The woman disappeared into one of the larger wickiups, returning with a small pot of dark salve. She gave it to Dolly, who brought it to Nathan. For your wound, she explained. Their medicine is similar to ours, but includes plants that grow only in these high mountains. It will complete your healing. Nathan accepted the gift with gratitude. As Dolly applied the salve to his shoulder, he watched the efficient preparations around them. Nakohe's warriors were well armed, carrying not just traditional weapons but also rifles and even a few pistols, evidence of trading or perhaps battlefield scavenging. Melly joined them, her expression more serene than it had been in days. The knife will be made whole tonight, she said. Before we depart, Nakohe will perform the ceremony to reunite the pieces. Is that significant beyond the symbolic? Nathan asked. All symbols carry power, Melly replied. If we believe in them, our people have believed in this one for generations. The knife restoration ceremony began precisely as the sun reached its zenith, when the shadow of the central lodge pole disappeared completely, the moment when the veil between the physical and spirit worlds was thinnest. The entire tribe had been preparing since dawn, fasting, purifying themselves in sweat lodges, donning their finest ceremonial attire adorned with symbols of their clan histories. They gathered now in concentric circles around a specially prepared ceremonial ground, a circular space meticulously cleared and smoothed, then covered with fine white sand upon which intricate symbols had been drawn using pigments of 4 colors. The outermost circle consisted of the children, then women, then warriors, with elders forming the innermost ring around Nakohe and the 4 visitors. At each cardinal point stood a tribal guardian holding a staff wrapped with specific medicine bundles: eagle feathers to the east, antelope hide to the south, bear claws to the west, and wolf fur to the north. Their faces were painted with the ancient patterns of their respective directions' power. The old chief, Nakohe, had undergone the most extensive preparation. His face was painted half white, half black, symbolizing his position between this world and the spirit realm. His chest bore symbols representing the history of both Apache bands, their separation and imminent reunion. Around his neck hung tokens from 7 generations of chiefs before him, each containing a fragment of their medicine power. He sat cross-legged on a woven mat of 7 sacred grasses, the knife pieces arranged before him on a piece of soft white deerskin, taken from a deer that had given itself willingly to the hunters, as the story went. Beside him burned 7 different woods in a stone fire pit, each representing a generation since the knife's breaking. This ceremony has not been performed in living memory, Chido explained quietly to Nathan. The songs were kept by special keepers, men and women who memorized them without ever expecting to use them in their lifetime. Nakohe began not with words, but with silence, a profound stillness that spread through the assembled tribe until even the smallest children stood motionless. Then, after what seemed an eternity, he produced a bone whistle hung on a cord around his neck. Its high piercing notes seemed to cut through the dimensions themselves, calling attention from both seen and unseen worlds. Only then did the chanting begin, in a language that made the Apache Nathan had been learning sound modern by comparison. The words had a musical quality, rising and falling like the mountains themselves, with sounds Nathan had never heard human throats produce. Several elders joined Nakohe, their voices weaving together in complex harmony. "This is the first language," Melly whispered to Nathan, "the one our ancestors spoke when the world was new. Few remember it now, but the spirits still understand." As they chanted, Nakohe's gnarled hands moved with surprising grace. He took a golden eagle feather and swept it through the smoke rising from the fire, then used it to trace patterns in the air above the knife pieces, patterns that Nathan could almost see lingering like ghostly calligraphy. Into the fire, Nakohe sprinkled carefully measured portions from 7 small pouches arranged before him. Sage that crackled and released blue-tinged smoke, cedar that burned with intense fragrance, sweetgrass that smoldered with a honey-sweet scent, tobacco that made the flames leap higher, crushed turquoise that turned the fire momentarily green, dried juniper berries that sparked like tiny stars, and finally a powder so ancient and sacred that even Melly didn't know its name, which caused the flames to burn with an impossible purple hue. The chant built in intensity, Nakohe's age-weakened voice drawing strength not just from some inner reserve, but visibly from the assembled tribe. As his voice faltered, others would raise theirs, lending their strength to his purpose. The rhythm of the chant synchronized with the heartbeats of all present, a phenomenon Nathan could feel in his own chest, his heart adjusting to match the ceremonial pulse. With movements choreographed by tradition, Nakohe lifted the handle portion of the knife. He raised it toward the eastern sky, then south, then west, then north, then up to the heavens, then down to the earth, and finally to the center, the heart. Around the circle, the gathered tribe responded with a synchronized breath at each direction, the sound like wind moving through a canyon. He repeated this sacred pattern with the blade, and then with the shell inlay piece, each time the response from the tribe growing stronger, until the final presentation of the inlay piece brought a sound like distant thunder, though the sky remained clear. Throughout this process, Nathan noticed something extraordinary. The knife pieces had begun to exhibit a subtle luminescence, a glow that couldn't be explained by the reflection of sunlight or firelight. The intricate designs etched into the handle and blade seemed to move slightly, as if the metal and bone were breathing. "The knife remembers its wholeness," Dolly whispered, seeing his expression. "It wants to be complete again." Then came the moment of reunion. With movements so deliberate they seemed to occur outside of normal time, Nakohe positioned the shell fragment in its hollow in the handle. As it settled into place, a visible ripple of energy passed through the assembled tribe. People swayed slightly, as if feeling a wind that wasn't there. The inlay fit perfectly, completing an intricate design that Nathan now recognized as a map of the region's waterways, including the hidden spring of Shadow Valley. With the same ceremonial precision, Nakohe aligned the blade with the handle, the broken edges matching as if they had never been separated. As the pieces touched, the chanting reached its crescendo, and a sound like a single clear bell tone seemed to emanate from the knife itself, though Nathan couldn't be certain if he heard it with his ears or felt it in his bones. From a pouch that had been passed down through 7 generations of medicine keepers, Nakohe produced a resinous substance with a color like amber mixed with blood. The firelight caught it, revealing tiny inclusions that sparkled like captured stars. This was no ordinary bonding material, but a sacred mixture containing elements from both tribes' territories: tree resin from the mountains, beeswax from the valleys, mineral dust from the mesas, and according to legend, a tear from the first chief who had overseen the knife's breaking. "The binding contains both sorrow and hope," Ahote explained quietly, "as all important unions must." Nakohe applied this along the broken edges with his index finger, tracing ancient symbols as he did so. Then, from around his own neck, he removed a cord of sinew that had been strengthened with the hair of 7 generations of chiefs. This he wrapped around the joining, his ancient fingers suddenly deft and precise, creating a pattern that would hold the pieces together while the resin set. For the final step, 4 chosen representatives, one from each direction, approached the circle. Each carried a coal from their family's fire in a stone cup. These were added to the ceremonial fire, causing it to flare with renewed vigor. Nakohe then held the reassembled knife over this unified flame, turning it slowly, allowing the sacred resin to melt and flow into the cracks. As the resin flowed, it seemed to draw the pieces together of their own accord, the fracture lines becoming less and less visible until, In a moment that drew a collective gasp from the assembly, they disappeared entirely. The knife was whole again, not repaired, but restored to its original unity, as if the breaking had been merely an illusion. A profound silence fell over the gathered tribe as Nakohe raised the restored knife toward the sky, now a single gleaming entity catching the zenith sun. The silence was broken only by the sound of a lone eagle's cry as it circled overhead, a sign so auspicious that even the most stoic warriors exchanged looks of wonder. When he finally fell silent, holding the restored knife aloft for all to see, a palpable release of tension rippled through the gathered tribe. Someone began a new chant, quickly joined by others until dozens of voices rose in harmony. Nakohe stood with effort, assisted by two younger men. He approached Nathan, the rebuilt knife extended in both hands. "This belongs to neither tribe alone, but to all our people," he said, his voice carrying despite its age-roughened quality. "You will carry it until the waters are safe. Then it will rest in the sacred cave, whole once more." Nathan hesitated. "I'm not Apache. Should one of your people carry it instead?" The old chief shook his head. "You stand between worlds, Nathan Reed. That is your burden and your gift. Take the knife." With profound respect, Nathan accepted the ceremonial blade. It felt warm in his hands, vibrating slightly as if with its own energy, though he told himself that was merely the lingering heat from the fire. "I will carry it with honor," he promised. Within the hour, they were ready to depart. 20 of Nakohe's warriors, led by a stern-faced man introduced as Chido, Nakohe's grandson, would accompany them back to Shadow Valley. The journey would be faster than their arrival had been, Chido explained, as his men knew secret paths through the mountains. As they prepared to leave, Nakohe approached Nathan once more. The old chief's strength seemed diminished after the ceremony, his shoulders more stooped, his steps more careful. "When you face these men who seek the waters," he said quietly, "remember that fighting is not always won with weapons. Sometimes the greatest victory comes from understanding your enemy's mind." "I'll remember," Nathan promised, though he privately doubted that Ezra Thompson's mind held anything but greed and vengeance. They traveled swiftly, following game trails and hidden paths that wound through the mountains with surprising directness. Chido set a demanding pace, pushing them from dawn until dusk with only brief rests. By the third day, they had crossed the high ridge and begun their descent toward Shadow Valley. Scouts ranged ahead and to both sides, alert for signs of Thompson's men. So far, they had encountered nothing suspicious, which Nathan found more worrying than reassuring. That evening, as they made camp for what should be their last night before reaching the valley, one of the scouts returned with alarming news. He spoke rapidly to Chido, gesturing toward the south. "What is it?" Nathan asked Ahote. Her expression was grim. "Many men camp near the entrance to our valley, perhaps 15, maybe more. They have wagons and equipment, not just guns, but shovels and picks." Mining equipment, Nathan realized. Thompson's not just looking anymore. He's preparing to claim the valley. Chido joined their discussion, speaking in Apache with Ahote, translating for Nathan's benefit. "He says we should attack at dawn when they are still sleeping," she relayed. "Strike hard and drive them away before they know our full strength." Nathan considered this. A dawn attack had tactical advantages, but also risks. "How many guns do they have? Are they posting guards?" After conferring with the scout, Chido confirmed that the white men had posted sentries and appeared well armed. A direct assault could result in significant casualties, even with the element of surprise. "There may be another way," Nathan suggested slowly. An idea was forming, dangerous, perhaps foolhardy, but potentially effective. "What if I approach them alone under a flag of truce?" Ahote's eyes widened. "To what purpose?" "To learn their plans, to gauge their strength, and perhaps," Nathan hesitated, "perhaps to offer Ezra Thompson what he really wants." "The map," Dolly guessed, her quiet voice cutting through the tension. "You would offer him the map in exchange for leaving the valley." "Not exactly," Nathan clarified. "I'd offer him something better, something he wants even more than the map or the valley." "What could that be?" Melly asked, her dark eyes searching his face. "Me," Nathan said simply, "the man who killed his brother." A heated discussion followed. Chido opposed the plan vigorously, arguing through Ahote that it placed too much reliance on the word of a white man who had already demonstrated his untrustworthiness. Ahote herself seemed torn, recognizing the tactical advantages but fearing a trap. Dolly listened thoughtfully before offering her perspective. Nathan understands these men in ways we cannot. If he believes this approach may succeed with less bloodshed, we should consider it. Melly remained silent throughout most of the debate, her expression distant as if listening to voices others couldn't hear. Finally, she spoke. I have seen two paths in my dreams, one red with blood, one dark with uncertainty. Both lead to the valley, but by different routes. Her gaze fixed on Nathan. The knife has been made whole. Now the man between worlds must choose the path. In the end, they reached a compromise. Nathan would approach Thompson's camp alone, but with conditions. Chido and his warriors would be positioned to attack if things went wrong. The three women would remain with the main Apache force, much to their vocal objection. I won't risk your lives, Nathan insisted. Not after everything you've done to save mine. Our lives are our own to risk, Ahote countered fiercely. Please, Nathan said, his voice softening. Trust me in this. If I fail, you'll still have a chance to defend the valley. If all of us are captured or killed, everything is lost. Reluctantly, they agreed to the plan. Nathan would leave at first light, carrying a white cloth tied to a stick as a flag of truce. Chido's warriors would shadow him, ready to intervene if negotiations failed. That night, as the camp settled into an uneasy rest, Nathan sat apart, checking and rechecking his revolver by the light of a small fire. The ceremonial knife rested in a sheath at his belt, its newly repaired form a tangible symbol of the strange journey that had brought him to this moment. He sensed rather than heard someone approach, recognizing Melly's light tread without looking up. You should rest, he said. Tomorrow will be challenging for everyone. As should you, she countered, settling beside him. After a moment's silence, she added, You intend to trade your life for the valley. It wasn't a question. Nathan sighed, holstering his revolver. If necessary, Ezra Thompson wants vengeance for his brother more than anything. If I can use that to protect the valley and all of you, it's a fair exchange. And if he kills you and still takes the valley, then Chido and his warriors will ensure it comes at a cost too high to bear, Nathan replied grimly. Melly studied his profile in the firelight. You have changed since we found you in the desert. Have I? Then you were ready to die because you saw no purpose in living. Now you are ready to end because you have found him anything worth protecting. Her voice softened. That is a profound change, Nathan Reed. He couldn't argue with her assessment. Somehow in the span of mere weeks, his world had transformed. The guilt and shame that had driven him for 5 years hadn't disappeared, but they had been joined by something new, a sense of belonging, of purpose, of connection to people who saw value in him beyond his past failures. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said carefully, I want you to know that finding you, all of you, has been a kind of salvation I never expected. Melly's hand found his in the darkness, her touch light but reassuring. The spirits rarely give us what we expect, Nathan, but they often give us what we need. She left him then, returning to where Ahote and Dolly had already settled for the night. Nathan watched her go, feeling a complex mixture of emotions he couldn't fully name. There was affection there, certainly, and gratitude, but also something deeper. A recognition that his fate had become inextricably bound with theirs in ways that transcended simple explanation. Dawn arrived with a sky the color of hammered copper, streaked with wisps of high cloud that caught the early light. Nathan dressed with care, choosing the cleanest of his trail-worn clothes. He strapped on his gun belt, but left it unbuckled as a sign of peaceful intent. The ceremonial knife he concealed beneath his vest, its presence a talisman of sorts. The three women and Chido gathered to see him off. Few words were spoken. What needed saying had been said in the night. Ahote clasped his forearm in the warrior's gesture she had taught him. Dolly touched his healed shoulder briefly, her eyes conveying what words could not. Melly simply nodded, her gaze steady and confident. Nathan mounted Penny, the white cloth of truce secured to a slender branch. With a last look at those who had become, against all odds, his family, he turned the mare toward Thompson's camp and whatever fate awaited him there. The approach took less than an hour, following a deer trail that wound through scattered pines toward the southern entrance of Shadow Valley. As he neared, Nathan could see that the scout's report had been accurate. A substantial camp had been established, with canvas tents, picketed horses, and several wagons loaded with equipment. Men moved about the camp, some still eating breakfast, while others prepared for the day's work. Nathan halted Penny at the edge of the clearing, in plain sight, but beyond easy rifle range. He raised the white flag and waited, his heart pounding, but his resolve firm. It didn't take long. A sentry spotted him and called out. Men reached for weapons, then hesitated at the sight of the truce flag. Someone ducked into the largest tent, emerging moments later with a familiar figure. Ezra Thompson, dressed in the practical but expensive clothing of a successful businessman, a pistol holstered at his hip. Thompson studied the distant rider through field glasses, then barked orders to his men. Two mounted up and rode toward Nathan, rifles at the ready. He remained motionless, the flag of truce held high. "That's far enough," one of the riders called when they were within speaking distance. "State your business." "My name is Nathan Reed," he replied clearly. "I've come to speak with Ezra Thompson." The two men exchanged startled glances. One kept his rifle trained on Nathan, while the other rode back to the camp at a gallop. Minutes later, he returned with Thompson himself, flanked by two additional armed men. Ezra Thompson reined in his horse about 20 yards from Nathan, studying him with cold calculation. The resemblance to his dead brother was strong, though Ezra lacked the captain's cruel mouth and had the bearing of a man accustomed to boardrooms rather than battlefields. "Nathan Reed," he said finally, his voice controlled, but with an undercurrent of satisfaction. "5 years I've been looking for you, and here you are riding into my camp under a white flag." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's either very brave or very foolish." "I'm here to talk," Nathan said evenly. "Just talk." "About what? Your surrender?" "Because that's the only conversation I'm interested in having with my brother's murderer." Nathan met his gaze steadily. "About Shadow Valley, about the waters you're seeking, and yes, about what happened 5 years ago." Thompson studied him for a long moment, visibly weighing his options. Finally, he gestured toward the camp. "Come in then, under truce, but if you try anything, my men won't hesitate to put a bullet in you." "Understood." Nathan nudged Penny forward, following Thompson and his escorts back to the camp. The men there watched him with undisguised hostility as he dismounted. He recognized a few faces from his army days, men who had served under Captain Thompson, and no doubt remembered the day their officer died at the hands of a subordinate. Ezra led him to the large tent that clearly served as his headquarters. Inside was a folding table covered with maps and papers, several camp chairs, and a well-stocked liquor case that seemed incongruous in the rugged setting. "Drink," Thompson offered with cold courtesy, pouring himself a measure of amber liquid. Nathan shook his head. "I need a clear head for this conversation." "As you wish." Thompson took a seat behind the table, gesturing for Nathan to take the chair opposite. The armed escorts positioned themselves by the tent entrance. "Now, what exactly did you come here to say?" Nathan took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts. Everything depended on reading this man correctly, on finding the right leverage to protect the valley and its inhabitants. "You've been hunting me for 5 years," he began. "Spent considerable resources tracking me across half the territories. That suggests this is personal for you, beyond just the bounty on my head." Thompson's expression hardened. "You killed my brother, shot him in the chest and left him to die in the dirt. So yes, Mr. Reed, it's extremely personal." "Do you know why I shot him?" "Because you were a coward, a deserter." Thompson's knuckles whitened around his glass. "James was a decorated officer serving his country, and you murdered him." Nathan leaned forward slightly. "Your brother ordered the massacre of an Apache village. Women, children, elders, people who posed no threat to anyone. When I tried to stop him, he knocked me unconscious. When I came to, I found him—" He hesitated, choosing his next words carefully. "I found him assaulting an Apache woman while her child watched." Thompson's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or unwelcome confirmation of suspicions long denied. "My brother was a soldier following orders," he said, but with less conviction. "What orders justify raping women and killing children?" Nathan countered quietly. "What orders make that acceptable?" Thompson drained his glass, refilling it immediately. "You didn't come here to debate military ethics, Reed. What do you want?" "I want you to leave Shadow Valley alone. Pack up your equipment and your men and go back to whatever city you came from." A harsh laugh escaped Thompson. And why would I do that? Because you asked nicely? We've found it, Reed, the tears of the sun from all those Apache legends. Not gold, as my brother thought, but something potentially more valuable. An underground spring that never runs dry, even in the worst drought years. Do you have any idea what water rights are worth in this territory? Nathan nodded. I understand exactly what you're after. I also understand that the valley is sacred to the Apache people and has been for generations. Taking it would mean war, not just with the small band living there, but with Nakohe's people as well. Nakohe? Thompson looked genuinely surprised. The old ghost from the northern mountains? We've heard rumors, but no white man has seen his camp in decades. I have, Nathan said simply. I've just come from there. 20 of his warriors are positioned within striking distance of this camp right now. That gave Thompson pause. He studied Nathan's face, searching for signs of a bluff. Even if that's true, my men are well armed. We've dealt with Apache attacks before. At what cost? How many men are you willing to lose for this venture? How many lives is water worth, even in the desert? Thompson's expression grew calculating. What exactly are you proposing, Reed? I don't believe for a moment you came here just to warn me off. Nathan had reached the crux of his gamble. He leaned back in his chair, affecting a casualness he didn't feel. I'm proposing a trade. Something you want more than water rights or mining claims. Something personal. Go on. Thompson's interest was clearly piqued. Me, Nathan said flatly. I'll surrender to you voluntarily. No resistance, no tricks. You can take me back to face justice for your brother's death. In exchange, you withdraw from Shadow Valley completely and permanently. Thompson stared at him, visibly weighing the offer. Why would you do that? Why sacrifice yourself for a piece of land and a few Apache women? Because some things are worth dying for, Nathan replied simply, and because I'm tired of running. A long silence followed as Thompson considered the proposal. He refilled his glass, took a thoughtful sip, then set it aside. How do I know this isn't some elaborate trap, that your Apache friends won't attack the moment I accept your surrender? Because I give you my word, Nathan said, holding his gaze steadily. The same word that made me oppose your brother when he ordered the massacre. The same word that's brought me here today, alone and under a flag of truce. Something shifted in Thompson's expression. Not softening exactly, but a subtle change in calculation. It's an interesting offer, Reed, but insufficient. I want justice for James, yes, but I've invested too much in this operation to simply walk away. Nathan had anticipated this response. What if I could offer you something more valuable than the valley's water? Something that would justify your expenses and satisfy your investors without bloodshed. Such as? Thompson's skepticism was evident. Instead of answering directly, Nathan reached carefully inside his vest, mindful of the armed men watching his every move. He withdrew the ceremonial knife, now whole again, and placed it on the table between them. Do you know what this is? He asked. As he placed the knife on the table, the shell inlay caught the light in an unusual way, seeming to pulse with an inner fire. For a brief, disorienting moment, he thought he heard a child's laughter. Kayla's laughter, though he'd never heard it in life. The memory of her from his vision rose unbidden. You saved me so I could save my sisters. Now they will save you so you can save the waters. The realization struck him with sudden clarity. This negotiation wasn't just about water rights or medicinal plants or even his own redemption. It was about completing a circle that had begun 5 years ago when he made the choice to protect rather than destroy. Kayla's spirit had somehow been guiding them all along, through Melly's dreams, through the reunification of the tribes, through his own journey back to face his past. With this new understanding steadying him, Nathan met Thompson's skeptical gaze directly. Thompson examined it with puzzled interest. Some kind of Apache artifact, valuable to collectors perhaps, but hardly. It's the key to healing plants that grow nowhere else in the territory, Nathan interrupted. Plants with medicinal properties your brother was searching for along with the gold he imagined. Plants worth far more to pharmaceutical companies than water rights to a remote valley. This was partly truth, partly bluff. Dolly had indeed spoken of unique plants growing in the caves behind the waterfall, but their true value was largely speculation on Nathan's part. However, he had gauged Thompson correctly as a businessman first and foremost, one who understood markets and profit potential. Interest kindled in Thompson's eyes. Go on. The Apache have used these plants for generations to treat ailments that white medicine struggles with. Fever, infection, and finan. Heck, even snake venom. The right pharmaceutical company would pay handsomely for exclusive access. And you're offering what exactly? Knowledge of these plants in exchange for leaving the valley? Nathan nodded. Not just knowledge, partnership. The Apache would harvest and prepare the plants using traditional methods. Your company would handle distribution and sales. Both sides profit without bloodshed or displacement. It was a bold proposal, one Nathan had no authority to make. Yet he sensed it might appeal to Thompson's business instincts more effectively than appeals to conscience or threats of violence. Thompson drummed his fingers on the table, considering. An interesting proposition, but it relies entirely on your word and the cooperation of people who have every reason to distrust white men. True, Nathan acknowledged, which is why I'm still offering myself as collateral. If the arrangement proves unworkable or unprofitable within a reasonable time frame, you still have me to return for the bounty. And the negotiation continued for another hour, with Thompson probing for weaknesses in the proposal and Nathan defending it with a conviction that surprised even himself. Gradually, he sensed the businessman's resistance weakening, replaced by cautious interest in a venture that offered profit without the risks and ethical complications of forcibly seizing Apache land. The negotiation was interrupted by sudden shouts and gunfire from outside the tent. Thompson leapt to his feet, hand flying to his pistol. What the devil? Nathan remained seated, oddly calm despite the chaos. That would be Nakohe's warriors. You brought them here? Thompson's face contorted with rage. This was a trap. Not a trap, Nathan corrected as rifle shots punctuated the air. Insurance. They rushed outside to find the camp in disarray. From the northern ridge, Apache warriors had appeared like ghosts, firing with deadly precision at Thompson's men. But what stunned Thompson wasn't the attack itself, it was the target. They're not shooting at us, he realized aloud, watching as the Apache fire focused entirely on a group of riders approaching from the east, riders flying the flag of a rival mining company. That's Collins and his men, Thompson muttered in disbelief. What are they doing here? Nathan's eyes narrowed. Your competitor. Were you expecting them? Thompson's expression hardened. Collins has been trying to undercut my operation for months. Must have followed us here. He glanced at Nathan. Your Apache friends just saved us from an ambush. Chitto rode down from the ridge once Collins's men had been driven off, his face painted for war, but his expression controlled. He spoke briefly in Apache to Nathan. He says now you both owe a debt to Nakohe's people, Nathan translated. A debt that can be repaid by honoring our agreement about the valley. Thompson studied the Apache warrior, then looked back at the retreating dust cloud that marked Collins's retreat. Calculation played across his features, followed by a reluctant respect. Tell him, Thompson said finally, that I understand the value of reliable partners. The negotiation resumed with a markedly different tone. Thompson now seeing the potential benefits of Apache alliance, rather than merely calculating the costs of their resistance. Finally, Thompson sat back in his chair, having apparently reached a decision. I'll need to discuss this with my backers, he said, and I'll want to meet with these Apache representatives myself before committing to anything. That can be arranged, Nathan replied carefully. Under proper conditions, with guarantees of safety for all parties. Agreed. Thompson extended his hand across the table. You've given me something to consider, Reed. I won't pretend your brother's death is forgotten or forgiven, but perhaps there's a more productive resolution available. Nathan accepted the handshake, aware that this was merely the beginning of a precarious process, not its conclusion. I'll return tomorrow with representatives from both Apache bands. We can begin formal discussions then. As he rose to leave, Thompson fixed him with a penetrating stare. One question, Reed. Why did you really come back after all these years? You could have kept running. Nathan considered the question seriously. Because sometimes the only way to escape your past is to face it, he said finally. And because I found something worth fighting for in a way that doesn't involve more bloodshed. Outside, he mounted Penny and rode slowly from the camp, the white flag still held high. Only when he was well beyond rifle range did he allow himself to breathe normally again. The gamble had paid off, not with complete victory, but with an opening that might lead to peace rather than war. Chido and several warriors emerged from the trees as he rode up the trail, their expressions a mixture of surprise and grudging respect. "You still live," Chido observed in his limited English. "Good talk." "Better than expected," Nathan replied. "But there's much more to do." They returned to the Apache camp to find the three women waiting anxiously. Nathan dismounted warily, the strain of the negotiation finally catching up with him. "Thompson has agreed to discuss alternatives to taking the valley by force," he explained as they gathered around him. "He's interested in the medicinal plants as a business opportunity." Ahote looked skeptical. "And you trust this?" "Not entirely," Nathan admitted. "But it's a beginning. He's a businessman at heart. Show him a profit that doesn't require bloodshed, and he may be persuaded." Dolly nodded thoughtfully. "The healing plants are sacred to our people, but we have always shared their benefits with those in need. A careful arrangement might be possible." Melly's eyes held a distant look. "Two paths," she murmured. "You have opened the one less red with blood, but the journey is not finished." That night, as they prepared to return to Shadow Valley the following morning, Nathan sat with the three women beside a small fire. The ceremonial knife lay between them, its newly repaired form gleaming in the firelight. "Whatever happens next," he said quietly, "I want you to know that finding you in the desert was no accident. It was salvation. For all of us, perhaps." Ahote's normally stern features softened slightly. "You brought danger to our valley, Nathan Reed, but also possibility. That is the way of life, shadow and light, always together." "Like the knife," Dolly observed, gesturing to the ceremonial blade. "Broken for generations, now whole again. Not without scars, but stronger, perhaps because of them." Melly smiled, her young face wise beyond her years in the flickering light. "Our grandmother told us we would find a husband in the desert. Not as white men understand marriage, but as our people do, a joining of lives toward a common purpose." She reached out, touching the knife lightly. "Four hearts, like the four directions, creating a circle of protection around what matters most." Nathan looked at each of them in turn, Ahote with her fierce pragmatism, Dolly with her gentle strength, Melly with her visionary spirit. Against all odds, he had found not just rescue in the desert, but family. Not just temporary shelter, but home. "Four hearts," he agreed softly, "in Shadow Valley." Melly touched the pouch containing Kala's moccasin that hung around her neck. "Five hearts," she corrected gently. "My sister's spirit has been part of this journey from the beginning. Her dreams guided our grandmother. Her memory guided me to you in the desert." Nathan nodded, understanding washing over him. The circle was larger than he had realized, extending beyond the living to embrace those who had passed but still shaped the path ahead. What had begun in violence and tragedy 5 years ago was transforming into something healing and whole. "Five hearts," he acknowledged, "across two worlds." As the fire burned low and stars filled the desert sky, Nathan Reed felt the weight of his past lighten, not through forgetting but through understanding that even the darkest journey could lead to unexpected light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new negotiations, perhaps new dangers. But tonight, in this moment, he was exactly where he needed to be. The man between worlds, no longer lost, finally found, completing a circle that had begun with a small act of courage amid unspeakable horror. Guided by the spirit of a child who had seen his true nature even before he recognized it himself. 3 weeks later, Nathan stood on the ridge overlooking Shadow Valley, watching as workers, a mixture of Thompson's men and Apache volunteers, carefully harvested the medicinal plants from the sacred caves. Below, near the stream's edge, Ezra Thompson conferred with Nakohe's grandson, Chido, reviewing a parchment document spread between them on a makeshift table. The negotiations had been tense and complex. There had been moments when it seemed everything would collapse, when Thompson's investors balked at the terms, when some of Nakohe's warriors questioned the wisdom of any partnership with white men, when the delicate balance of trust threatened to tip into suspicion. But perseverance and the promise of mutual benefit had ultimately prevailed. The agreement they'd reached was unprecedented. Thompson's company would have exclusive rights to distribute the healing plants, while the Apache would maintain complete control over the valley and its waters. A portion of all profits would be held in trust for both Apache bands, ensuring their survival for generations to come. Most importantly, Shadow Valley would remain their sanctuary, protected now not just by secrecy, but by legal documentation filed with territorial authorities. Quite a sight, Ahote said, joining Nathan on the ridge. In the weeks since their return, her stern demeanor had softened slightly, though she remained vigilant. Never thought I'd see such a thing. Peace through commerce, Nathan observed. It's not perfect, but it's a beginning. Dolly approached from the medicinal garden she had established near the Wickiups. Since the agreement, she had begun training both Apache youth and two interested scientists from Thompson's company in the traditional preparation of the healing plants. Her knowledge, once preserved only through oral tradition, was now being documented at her insistence, with proceeds benefiting her people. The first shipment leaves tomorrow, she announced. The fever remedy and the wound salve. Thompson believes they will revolutionize medicine in the East. And what of your bounty? Mealy asked Nathan, coming to stand beside him. She had cut her hair shorter since their return, a symbol of new beginnings in Apache tradition. Has Thompson truly forgiven his brother's death? Nathan shook his head. Not forgiven, but set aside. He withdrew the bounty last week, said it was bad for business to hunt his own business partner. The ceremonial knife, now fully restored, hung at Nathan's waist, a symbol of his unique position between two worlds. Nakoe had insisted he continue as its guardian, at least until the alliance between their peoples proved its durability. That evening, as the full moon rose over the valley, the four of them gathered in the central Wickiup that had become their shared home. Nathan had built an extension to accommodate their growing collection of books, maps, and trading records. What had begun as a temporary shelter had transformed into something permanent, a fusion of Apache tradition and practical innovations Nathan had introduced. I received word from Nakohe today, Melly said as they shared their evening meal. His health fails, but his spirit remains strong. He wishes us to visit when the snow clears from the high passes. We will go, Ehote confirmed. The knife should return to him for the blessing ceremony. Nathan nodded, thinking of how much had changed in so short a time. The nightmare that had haunted him for 5 years had not disappeared, but it had been transformed, from a burden of guilt into a bridge between peoples. The blood on his hands would never fully wash away, but it had, in some mysterious alchemy, become the foundation for healing larger wounds. Later, as Dolly and Ehote slept, Nathan stepped outside with Melly to gaze at the stars. They stood in comfortable silence until she spoke. Are you happy, Nathan Reed? Here with us in this life you never expected? He considered the question seriously, as he had learned to consider all of Melly's questions. Happy seems too small a word, he said finally. I feel whole. For the first time since before the war, maybe for the first time ever. Melly smiled, her expression serene in the moonlight. 4 hearts, she murmured. Like the 4 directions, creating a circle that nothing can break. Nathan slipped his arm around her shoulders, and together they watched as a shooting star traced a brilliant arc across the desert sky, a fitting emblem for the unlikely journey that had brought them all home to Shadow Valley.